I've been pretending I don't want kids for the last 3 years, and it's slowly breaking my heart. When my partner and I first got together, having kids wasn't really on the table. We were both focused on our careers, traveling, and figuring out life. It was one of those things we said we'd talk about later. But about a year into the relationship, they told me, very casually, over dinner, that they never wanted kids. I remember the exact moment. They were swirling a fork through their pasta, and I think I made some offhand comment about a friend's baby pictures. They looked up, smiled, and said, "Yeah, I'm really glad we're on the same page about not wanting kids." Just like that. And I froze. We'd never explicitly talked about it before, but in my head, I'd always assumed we'd have that conversation one day, and they'd come around. I thought maybe it was just something they felt now, like they didn't want kids yet, but they'd change their mind when the time was right. Except they were serious. That night, I lay awake next to them, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was supposed to speak up. I thought about telling them the truth, that I did want kids, not right away, but someday. That the idea of raising a little person together, of creating a family, was something I couldn't shake. But they looked so happy, so sure about their decision, that I couldn't bring myself to say anything. So, I lied. I told them I didn't want kids either. And now, 3 years later, I'm still pretending. Every time the topic comes up, I act like I'm relieved we're not those people who want to be parents. I laugh along when they talk about how exhausting kids are, how grateful they are that we'll never have to deal with tantrums or daycare fees. But inside, it's killing me. I see babies everywhere, at the park and grocery stores, on Instagram, and every time, I feel this deep, aching pull. Like there's a whole future I've locked away, a version of my life I'll never get to live. I imagine little things, holding a baby's tiny hand, decorating a nursery, watching a child grow and change and become their own person. And every time I let myself imagine it, I feel like I'm standing at the edge of a cliff, staring into a life I'll never have. I thought the feeling would fade with time, but it hasn't. If anything, it's grown stronger. And the worst part? My partner has no idea. They think we're perfectly aligned on this, that we're building a life together with no regrets, no what-ifs. And every time they talk about our future, I nod and smile, feeling like I'm betraying both of us. I'll try to convince myself that I don't really want kids, that maybe I've just romanticized the idea. I tell myself that our life is good the way it is, that we have freedom, time, and space to focus on each other. And some days, I almost believe it. But then, out of nowhere, the longing will hit me. Last month, we went to a birthday party for our friend's toddler. I spent the entire afternoon watching that little boy run around, laughing and falling and getting back up again. At one point, he climbed into my lap with sticky fingers and a big, goofy smile, and I felt something inside me crack open. When we got home that night, my partner made a joke about how exhausting the whole thing was. "Aren't you glad we don't have to deal with that?" They said, kissing me on the forehead. I smiled and nodded like always, but the truth was, I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. I cried in the shower that night. The thing is, I love my partner. I love the life we've built, the way we understand each other, the way they make me feel seen and safe. But this one thing, this missing piece, feels like a shadow that's always there, lurking just beneath the surface. And every day, I wonder how long I can keep pretending it doesn't matter. I've thought about telling them the truth so many times. I imagine sitting them down and saying, "I know I said I didn't want kids, but I do. I really do." But what happens after that? They were so clear about not wanting children, and I know deep down they're not going to change their mind. If I tell them the truth, it could break everything we've built. And I don't know if I'm ready to lose them. So I stay quiet. I push the thoughts down, tell myself that love is about compromise, that no relationship is perfect. I remind myself that people live happy, fulfilled lives without children, and that I can too. But every now and then, I catch myself wondering, how long can I keep this up? What happens when we're older, when our friends are busy with school events and family vacations and we're still here, just the two of us? Will I wake up one day, filled with resentment I can't swallow? Or worse, will they sense it and leave before I get the chance to tell the truth? I wish I could go back to that dinner 3 years ago when they first told me they didn't want kids. I wish I'd spoken up then, before the lie had a chance to grow roots. But it's too late now. The life we've built is tangled up in that lie. And if I pull it out, everything might collapse. So, for now, I keep pretending. I keep smiling when people ask if we want kids. I keep telling myself that love is enough. And I keep hoping, desperately, foolishly, that one day, the longing will fade. But it hasn't yet, and I don't know if it ever will. This is the story of how I almost died because of a fitted sheet. Yes, a bed sheet. Not skydiving. Not some wild encounter with an animal. Just me versus a piece of elasticized fabric. And let me tell you, the sheet almost won. It started on laundry day, which is already a dangerous activity when you're lazy and uncoordinated, like me. I was in one of those moods where you convince yourself, today, I'm going to get my life together. So I stripped the bed, washed the sheets, and even promised myself I'd fold them properly instead of just stuffing them into the closet in a ball like I usually do. I had big dreams, folks. Everything was going smoothly until it was time to put the freshly cleaned fitted sheet back on my bed. If you've ever wrestled with a fitted sheet, you know they're evil. Whoever designed them clearly wanted to introduce chaos into the world. You pull one corner over the mattress, and as soon as you move on to the next, the first one pops off like a rubber band from hell. But today, I was determined. I thought, not this time, sheet. Not today. So, I started with one corner, stretching it over the mattress like a pro. It stayed in place. Nice. Then I moved to the next corner, and after a bit of tugging and swearing, I got that one in place too. Things were looking good, and that's when things took a turn. I leaned over the bed to grab the third corner, pulling with all my might. But the sheet was tighter than I expected, and just as I yanked it into place, snap, the first corner popped off with the force of a slingshot. The elastic smacked me in the leg so hard it left a red welt, and the sheet flung itself halfway across the bed like it was mocking me. I grumbled and repositioned myself, determined not to let a piece of fabric ruin my day. I climbed onto the mattress. Yes, on the mattress, thinking maybe I'd have more leverage if I was lying down. Big mistake. As I crouched on all fours, wrestling with the rogue corner of the sheet, I leaned too far to one side. The mattress shifted, and suddenly I lost my balance. My hand slipped off the edge, and in a split second, I toppled sideways off the bed like a drunken gymnast. And that's when the real trouble started. On my way down, the sheet, because it wasn't done with me yet, wrapped itself around my ankle. I tried to catch myself, but I was already falling, and the next thing I knew, I was crashing headfirst into the bedside table. My lamp went flying. The water bottle I'd set there earlier toppled over, and I landed hard on my back with the fitted sheet tangled around my leg like it was trying to drag me into the underworld. Now, let me tell you something. When you've just cracked your head on furniture and you're lying on the floor with a sheet wrapped around your leg like a python, it's hard not to question every choice you've ever made. I just lay there for a moment, stunned, trying to figure out if I was seriously injured or just emotionally destroyed. And then, as if on cue, my ceiling fan, which had been slowly rotating the whole time, decided to drop a giant dust bunny right onto my face. I kid you not. There I was, lying on the floor, tangled in a sheet, nursing what felt like a mild concussion, when a clump of dust gently landed on my forehead like life's final insult. For a second, I genuinely thought, this is it. This is how I die. Wrapped in a fitted sheet, covered in dust, found by paramedics who'll have to explain this nonsense to my family. It took me a few minutes to recover from the shock and untangle myself from the sheet. Every part of my body hurt. My back from the fall, my head from hitting the table, and my dignity from all of it. I sat there on the floor, staring at the bed like it had betrayed me. And the worst part? The sheet wasn't even halfway on the mattress yet. I eventually hobbled to the kitchen, grabbed some ice for my head, and sat on the couch in defeat. The bed could wait. My pride needed time to heal. The next day, I told a friend what happened, hoping for some sympathy. Instead, they laughed so hard they almost choked on their coffee. "You got taken down by a sheet?" they said between gasps. "Are you okay? Or should I buy you one of those weighted blankets so it doesn't fight back?" So, what's the moral of the story? Respect fitted sheets. They're not just bedding. They're agents of chaos. And if you ever think you can outsmart one, you better think again. One wrong move, and you'll find yourself flat on the floor, tangled up like a fool, wondering how you managed to almost die from doing laundry. Stay safe out there, folks. Life will come for you, even in the comfort of your own bed. It's the kind of thing you never think will happen to you, until it does. And once it starts, it's like a snowball rolling downhill, picking up speed, and you're just standing there, watching everything crash. I knew it was wrong from the start, and I still did it. And now I got nothing left but regrets. It happened earlier this year. I was 25, trying to get my life together after a bad breakup. I'd moved back to my hometown to save money, working a dead-end job and spending most of my time hanging out with my best friend, Sean. He'd always been my anchor, the kind of guy who never judged me, no matter how much I screwed up. If anyone knew me inside and out, it was Sean. I thought nothing could ever come between us. Sean's mom, Lauren, was around a lot when we were growing up. She'd raised him and his sister on her own after his dad left. I'd spent more time at their house than my own, and Lauren always treated me like family. But Lauren wasn't like most moms. She was beautiful, sharp, confident, the kind of woman who always seemed to have her act together, no matter how chaotic things got. She had this warm, easygoing vibe that made her fun to be around. And yeah, she was hot. Everyone knew it. Guys used to make comments about how good-looking she was, but none of us ever took it seriously. It was just a joke, nothing more. She was Sean's mom. Off limits. That was the unspoken rule. Always had been, until the night I broke it. It started on a quiet Friday. Sean had invited me over to hang out, just a chill night like we'd had 100 times before. But an hour before I got to his place, he called to say his girlfriend needed him to pick her up from out of town. "Just hang at the house," he said. "My mom's home. She'll let you in. I'll be back in a couple of hours." When I got there, Lauren was in the kitchen, drinking a glass of wine and scrolling through her phone. She smiled when she saw me. "Hey, stranger," she said. "It's been a while. Want some wine?" I figured, why not? It was just a glass. No big deal. I sat down and we started talking about life, work, how weird it felt being back in town after so long. It felt normal at first, familiar, but somewhere along the way, the conversation got deeper, more personal. She told me how hard it had been living alone now that Sean and his sister were grown. "You know," she said, swirling the wine in her glass, "sometimes I wonder what it would have been like if things had gone differently. If I'd found someone to really stick around." There was something in the way she said it, something soft, almost vulnerable. I wasn't sure what to say, so I just nodded. But then she gave me this look, like she was waiting for me to fill the silence with something. "You've turned into such a handsome young man," she said after a moment. "I bet you don't even realize it." My heart started racing. It was just a compliment, but it didn't feel harmless. I told myself I was reading too much into it, that she was just being friendly. But then she reached across the table and touched my hand. And that's when I knew. I should have made an excuse and left. I knew that was the right thing to do, but I didn't. I stayed. Then, without thinking, I leaned in and kissed her. For a second, I thought she might stop me, tell me I was crazy, that we shouldn't be doing this. But she kissed me back, and everything spiraled out of control from there. One kiss turned into two, and the next thing I knew, we were on the couch, our hands all over each other. It felt reckless and wild, like nothing outside of that moment mattered. We ended up in her bedroom. It happened fast, and it felt unreal, like I was watching myself from the outside, knowing I was making the worst mistake of my life, and doing it anyway. Afterward, we lay there in silence, both of us knowing exactly how badly we'd screwed up. Lauren looked over at me, gave me a small, tired smile, and said, "This stays between us, okay?" I nodded, but we both knew it wasn't going to be that simple. I told myself it was a one-time thing, a moment of weakness we'd both moved past. But a few days later, she texted me. "It was nice the other night," she wrote, followed by a winking emoji. I should have shut it down right there. I knew I should have, but instead, I texted her back. And that's when everything spiraled for good. We started meeting in secret, sneaking around whenever Sean wasn't home. At first, it was just physical, but it didn't take long for it to feel like more than that. We talked. We laughed. We spent time together like we were in some kind of twisted, hidden relationship. It was exciting and forbidden and absolutely addicting. But the guilt was always there. gnawing at me every time I saw Sean. He had no idea what was going on, and every time we hung out, I felt like the worst kind of person. I kept telling myself I'd stop, that I'd end it before things got worse. But every time Lauren texted me, I went back. I couldn't stop myself. And then everything blew up, because of course it did. One afternoon, I was at Lauren's house. We were sitting on the couch, way too close for it to look innocent, when the front door opened. My heart dropped. It was Sean. He stood in the doorway, his eyes flicking between the two of us, and I saw the moment it clicked. "What the fuck?" he whispered, his voice thick with disbelief. I jumped up, trying to explain, but what could I say? "Sorry, man. I've been sleeping with your mom?" There was no version of this that could make it okay. Sean just stared at me, like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Then his face twisted with anger, and he clenched his fists at his sides. "Get the hell out," he said, his voice trembling. "We're done." I tried to apologize, but he cut me off. "You're dead to me," he said. "Don't ever talk to me again." And just like that, the friendship I thought would last forever was gone. I left without another word, knowing I'd just destroyed the best thing I ever had. Sean blocked me on everything, phone, social media, the whole deal. I haven't heard from him since. As for Lauren, we stopped talking after that. Whatever we had, whatever it was, ended the second Sean found out. And honestly, that was for the best. It's been months now, and I still think about it every day. How easily I threw away years of friendship for something that never should have happened. I knew better, and I did it anyway. So yeah, that's my story. It's not something I'm proud of, and I don't expect anyone to understand. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Some mistakes cost you everything. And once you cross that line, there's no going back. This happened 2 weeks ago, and I'm still trying to make sense of it. I've never been one to believe in ghosts or paranormal stuff, but after this night, I'm not so sure anymore. I was driving home after visiting my brother, who lives about an hour away from me. The highway, I take cuts through some farmland, and there's a long stretch with no lights, no houses, just open fields and a few scattered trees along the side of the road. It's always a bit creepy at night, but I've driven it enough times that I know it well. Or at least I thought I did. That night was especially dark. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, and the only light came from my headlights cutting through the road ahead. I had the radio on low, and everything was calm. Just me, the hum of the engine, and the empty highway. About halfway through the drive, I saw something up ahead, a figure standing on the shoulder of the road. At first, I thought it was a hitchhiker, which was weird given how remote the area was. As I got closer, I slowed down slightly to get a better look. It was a woman. She was wearing a long, white dress that fluttered slightly in the breeze, even though there was no wind. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders, and she stood perfectly still, her arms limp at her sides. But the weirdest part? She was barefoot, on an empty highway, in the middle of the night. Everything in me told me not to stop. I told myself it was probably just someone who'd run out of gas, or maybe she'd been in an argument with a driver and got left behind. But something felt wrong. I slowed down just enough to get a closer look as I passed her. And then she turned. Her head snapped toward my car as I drove by, too fast and too sharp, like someone pressing fast forward on a video. Her face was pale and gaunt, and her eyes. I'll never forget those eyes. They were wide, unblinking, and locked onto mine as I sped past. My heart leapt into my throat. I hit the gas, tried to put as much distance between me and her as possible. My hands were shaking, but I kept driving, my eyes flicking between the road ahead and the rearview mirror. And that's when I saw it. She was standing in the middle of the road behind me. There was no way she could have moved that fast. I'd only glanced away for a second, but there she was, her white dress glowing faintly in the darkness, her eyes still fixed on me. I floored it, my tires screeching as the car shot forward. My mind was racing, trying to rationalize what I'd just seen. Maybe I was tired. Maybe the darkness was playing tricks on me. But no matter how much I tried to convince myself, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. I drove for what felt like forever, my heart hammering in my chest. The road stretched on, and I kept glancing in the mirror, half expecting to see her standing there again. And then, just when I thought I was in the clear, I saw her. Again, This time, she was standing on the side of the road ahead of me, exactly where she had been before, barefoot, arms at her sides, her long dress fluttering ever so slightly. It was like I'd driven in a circle, even though I knew that wasn't possible. My chest tightened. I felt like the air was being sucked out of the car. I gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, trying to figure out what the hell was happening. As I sped past her a second time, she did the exact same thing. Her head snapped toward me, eyes locked onto mine, wide and unblinking. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. I just kept driving faster and faster, hoping that if I didn't look back, she wouldn't be there. But the worst part? She was smiling this time. Not a kind smile. Not a sad one either. It was the kind of smile that said, "I know something you don't." I kept driving, pushing the car as fast as it could go, praying I'd make it out of that stretch of highway. My hands were slick with sweat, and I could barely breathe, but I didn't dare stop. I couldn't. After what felt like hours, I saw it, the glow of a gas station up ahead. The neon sign was like a beacon in the dark, and I've never been so relieved to see anything in my life. I pulled into the lot, slammed the car into park, and sat there, gasping for breath, my heart still racing. The attendant looked up from behind the counter as I stumbled inside, probably wondering why I looked like I'd seen a ghost. I didn't care. I just needed to be around people, somewhere bright, somewhere safe. I stood there for a few minutes, pretending to browse the candy aisle, until I finally calmed down. But even as I tried to convince myself that I'd imagined the whole thing, I couldn't stop thinking about her. That woman, I've driven that highway dozens of times since, but I've never seen her again. Still, every time I pass that stretch of road, I get this sick feeling in the pit of my stomach like she's still out there, waiting. And sometimes, when I'm lying in bed late at night, just on the edge of sleep, I swear I hear it. The soft shuffle of bare feet on asphalt. And that strange, knowing smile. Alright, so my first night stripping was honestly one of the wildest, most terrifying nights of my life. I had no idea what I was walking into. And if someone had told me what was going to happen that night, I probably would have turned around and run straight home. But I needed the money, and at that point in my life, I was in full survival mode. I was 22, broke, and fresh out of ideas. I had just quit a bartending gig because my boss was the type who thought flirting for tips was part of the job description. My credit cards were maxed out, rent was due, and my phone bill had just bounced. I was so stressed that even the idea of asking my parents for help made me want to vomit. So when my friend Sarah, who always seemed to have a suspicious amount of cash, told me she danced at a club a few nights a week, I figured, why not? She made it sound easy. Just go in, look hot, dance a little, and leave with cash. You'll get the hang of it. Simple, right? Huh. If only. The club she recommended was called the Sapphire Room, which sounded way fancier than the reality. I called ahead, and the manager told me to come by that night to see if I had what it takes. I'm still not sure what that even means, but I didn't ask questions. I threw on my only pair of heels, some wobbly platforms I bought for a wedding, along with a black bodysuit that was more last-minute H&M than sexy, but it was the best I had. I plastered on way too much makeup, gave myself a pep talk in the mirror, and headed out. When I walked into the club, I was immediately hit by a wall of noise, perfume, and neon lights. The place was darker and grittier than I expected, definitely not as glamorous as Sarah had made it sound. I could feel the bass thumping in my chest, and it smelled like vanilla body spray, cheap booze, and cigarette smoke. The bouncer waved me through like I'd been there a million times, but every step I took made me feel more like an imposter. The manager, Tony, was standing at the bar counting a wad of cash. He didn't even look up as I introduced myself. First time, he asked without missing a beat. Yeah, I said, shifting awkwardly in my heels. Cool. You're up after Roxy. And that was it. No prep, no pep talk, no advice, just you're up. I made my way to the dressing room, feeling like I just walked onto a movie set I wasn't supposed to be on. The other dancers barely glanced at me, except for one girl with long black hair and rhinestones glued to her eyelids. She gave me a little smirk and said, "You're the new girl?" Huh? Don't worry, we all sucked our first night. Before I could even answer, the DJ announced, "All right, fellas, give it up for Ivy." Yes, Ivy. Don't ask me why I picked it. I panicked when Tony asked earlier and figured it sounded sexy enough. I took a deep breath, my hands shaking, and stepped out onto the stage. Now, I wish I could tell you I strutted out there like Beyoncé, owning the stage and making it rain on my first go. But nope. The second I hit the stage, I realized the lights were way brighter than I expected, and I couldn't see anything past the first row. My heart was pounding so hard I thought the DJ could probably hear it over the music. The song started, and I grabbed the pole like it was the only thing keeping me upright. My first move was supposed to be a graceful little spin, but I misjudged my grip and ended up doing this weird stumble-twirl combo. I heard someone in the audience chuckle, and I could feel my face turn about 10 shades of red. But I kept going. I figured if I was going to embarrass myself, I might as well commit to it. I flipped my hair, swayed my hips, and tried to look sexy, but I knew I looked like Bambi on ice. A few guys threw singles onto the stage, probably out of pity, and I scooped them up as gracefully as I could, which wasn't very graceful, to be honest. When the song finally ended, I practically ran off the stage, my legs shaking so badly I thought I might collapse. Back in the dressing room, the rhinestone eyelid girl, her name was Kira, grinned at me. "See? Not so bad," she said, handing me a bottle of water. "You stayed upright, so that's already better than half the new girls." I laughed, mostly out of relief, but I was still in full panic mode. The night wasn't over, and I still had to figure out how to survive the rest of it. Next up, lap dances. This was the part one had been dreading the most. My first customer was a guy in his late 20s who looked just as nervous as I felt. He handed me $40 and said, this is my first time doing this. Am I supposed to do anything?" "Just sit back and enjoy," I said, trying to sound confident, even though I had no idea what I was doing. We spent the whole dance awkwardly avoiding eye contact, and by the end of it, I was just as relieved as he was. Then came the creep. There's always one. This guy was in his 40s, reeked of cheap cologne, and kept trying to grab my waist, even after I told him no. "Relax, baby," he slurred. "You're supposed to have fun." I ended the dance early and stormed off, half expecting Tony to get mad at me for walking away from a customer. But when I told him what happened, he just shrugged. Good call. Some guys are assholes. By the end of the night, I was exhausted. My feet were killing me, my legs felt like jelly, and I was pretty sure I had glitter stuck in places glitter should never go. But when I counted my tips, $1.90, I couldn't help but feel a weird sense of pride. I had survived, barely but still. Walking out of the club that night, clutching my shoes and smelling like a mix of sweat and vanilla spray, I felt different. Not invincible, but stronger. I had done something that scared the hell out of me, and I made it through. I went back the next night, and the night after that. Each time it got a little easier. I learned how to move without tripping, how to read customers, and how to set boundaries without feeling guilty. It wasn't always glamorous, but it gave me the freedom I needed and a little bit of confidence too. After a few months, I decided to move on, but those first few nights, they taught me more than I ever expected. I learned how to hustle, how to stand my ground, and how to fake confidence until it felt real. So yeah, my first night was a mess, but it was also the start of something that made me stronger. And honestly, I wouldn't trade that experience for anything. It happened 2 nights ago. Fresh. Too fresh. I wasn't even sure I should talk about it, but I need to because whatever happened isn't over. I can feel it lingering like a shadow that stretches a little too far, a little too long. I was driving back home from a friend's place. We'd hung out way later than planned, and by the time I left, it was around 2 a.m. The route I took was familiar, just back roads through some farmland, then a highway stretch. The kind of road where your headlights are the only light for miles. It was cold that night, just above freezing. A light mist had settled on the fields, the fog hanging low over the road, thick and clinging. I rolled down my window a crack, hoping the fresh air would keep me awake. But the further I drove, the more uneasy I started to feel. It was subtle at first, just that creeping sensation that you're not alone, that something somewhere is watching you. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, but the back seat was empty. Nothing but the occasional rustling of the breeze through the crack in the window. About 20 minutes in, I spotted something strange up ahead. At first, it looked like an animal, a dark shape sitting in the middle of the road. I slowed down, squinting through the mist. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't an animal. It was a person. They were crouching, knees drawn up to their chest, arms wrapped around their legs, rocking slowly back and forth. Their head was tucked down so I couldn't see their face, just wet hair clinging to their scalp. My heart started racing. I stopped the car about 15 feet away, engine idling, and stared through the windshield trying to process what I was looking at. Who the hell sits in the middle of a road like that in the dead of night? I leaned on the horn, just a quick honk to see if they'd react. They didn't. They just kept rocking back and forth, slowly, like they hadn't even noticed me. I sat there for a moment, debating whether I should get out and check if they were okay. But something deep inside me told me not to. There was something wrong about the way they moved, like they were doing it on purpose, just slow enough to make me feel like I was running out of time. And then, without warning, they stopped. The rocking stopped dead, and they lifted their head. It wasn't a face I'll ever forget. The eyes were too wide, too empty, staring straight at me. Their mouth hung open slightly, as if they were about to say something, but no words came out. Just a strange, low hiss, like air escaping a punctured tire. And then they smiled. It wasn't a normal smile. It was stretched too far, like the skin at the corners of their mouth was tearing just to accommodate it. The kind of smile you see in a nightmare. I slammed the car into reverse, tires screeching as I backed up. But just as I was about to shift into drive and floor it around them, they stood up. No rush, just a smooth, fluid movement, too graceful to be human. And they started walking toward my car. Not running, just walking. I punched the gas, swerving around them as fast as I could. As I passed, I glanced out the window, just a quick glance, I swear, and that's when I saw it. There were more of them, dozens, maybe hundreds, figures just like the first one, standing silently in the fields on either side of the road. They weren't moving, just standing there in the mist, watching me as I drove past. I pressed the gas harder, my hands gripping the wheel, so tight my knuckles turned white. The road felt endless, like I was trapped in some kind of loop, with nothing but those silent figures waiting just beyond the fog. And then I saw it, a sign, just ahead, glowing faintly in the mist. Welcome home. I don't remember ever seeing that sign before, and I knew, without a doubt, that I wasn't anywhere near my town. I glanced in the rearview mirror, just for a second, and that's when I saw it. Someone was sitting in the back seat. Their face was pale, lips curled into that same awful smile. I don't know how they got in. The car had been locked, and I hadn't stopped long enough for anyone to climb inside. But they were there, sitting quietly, watching me with those wide, empty eyes. And then, without moving their lips, they whispered, "You shouldn't have left." My blood ran cold. I kept driving, trying not to look in the mirror again, praying that if I just kept going, the thing in the back seat would disappear. But it didn't. It stayed, silent, watching. When I finally reached the highway, the fog lifted and the car felt normal again. I pulled off at the nearest rest stop, jumped out, and checked the back seat. It was empty. No sign of anyone. No footprints, no dampness, nothing. But there on the seat was something small, a piece of wet fabric, a strip from a hospital gown. I haven't told anyone about what happened. I haven't driven that road since. And every time I get into my car, I check the back seat, just in case, because deep down I know they're still out there, waiting. And one day, they'll come back for me. Maybe next time, I won't get away. We were together for almost 5 years. 5 years of holidays, shared playlists, Netflix marathons, and those little routines that make someone feel like home. I thought we were happy, maybe not head over heels every second, but comfortable in the way that long-term love is supposed to feel. I trusted him with everything. I thought we were solid. But love, as it turns out, doesn't always protect you from betrayal. The signs were there. I just didn't want to see them. It started with the tiniest changes, so small they were easy to dismiss. He used to be the type who couldn't go more than a few hours without texting me. Even if it was just something silly like, "Saw a dog today, made me think of you." But suddenly, the messages slowed. They went from being thoughtful updates to quick, cold replies. "Busy at work," he'd say, always with the same excuse. At first, I didn't think much of it. We all have busy days. I told myself not to be needy, but then came the phone. You know how it goes. It always starts with the phone. He used to leave his lying around the house. No passwords, no secrets. Now it was always locked, always face down. He carried it with him everywhere, into the bathroom, outside when he took the trash out. When it buzzed and I glanced at it out of habit, he'd swipe it away without a word. I remember teasing him about it once, saying, "What, are you texting the FBI?" He gave me that same tight, forced smile I'd been seeing a lot lately. "It's nothing. Just work." At the time, I laughed it off, but a small part of me knew nothing about this is normal. Then came the gym. Out of nowhere, he was suddenly obsessed with working out. He'd never cared about fitness before, but now he was spending hours at the gym every day, buying new clothes, new sneakers, protein powders, cologne, things he never used to care about. I told myself it was good. Self-improvement, right? Who doesn't want their partner to feel good about themselves? But the thing that stung was that all this effort wasn't for me. He wasn't dressing up for our dates or planning time for us. No, this version of him seemed reserved for someone else. The nights out started not long after. "Just drinks with the guys," he'd say. "Late meeting at work." I believed him at first. I wanted to believe him. But the late nights started stacking up, and the explanations got vaguer. One night, he came home after midnight, smelling like alcohol and perfume. Not mine. I asked him, "How was it? Good night with the guys?" He gave me that too casual shrug. "Yeah, same old." That's when I felt the first real crack in my heart. But I didn't say anything. I wasn't ready to confront it yet. I wasn't ready for the truth. The final straw came one Friday night. He told me he had a work event and wouldn't be home until late. I smiled and said, "Have fun," but as soon as the door closed behind him, I felt the walls closing in on me. I couldn't sit still. My heart was pounding, and my mind wouldn't stop racing. So, I did something I never thought I'd do. I checked the location sharing app on my phone. We'd shared our locations for years. It was one of those little safety things couples do, just in case. But I'd never felt the need to check before. Until now. His location popped up, and there it was. He wasn't at a work event. He wasn't even near the office. He was at a hotel. My hand started shaking. I refreshed the screen over and over, praying that it was a glitch. But it wasn't. He stayed right there, that little blinking dot on the map, sitting in a place he shouldn't have been. He didn't come home until 3 a.m., reeking of alcohol and that same unfamiliar perfume. I was sitting on the couch when he walked in. When he saw me, his face faltered, just for a second, before he forced a smile. "You're still up?" he asked like nothing was wrong. "How was the work event?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. He blinked, surprised by the question. "Good. You didn't have to wait up." I held up my phone, the location app still open. "Were you at the hotel all night?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. His face went pale. For a moment, he looked like he was about to deny it, like he could spin some story to save himself. But then the fight went out of him. He slumped onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. "It's not what it looks like," he mumbled. I laughed bitterly, the sound sharp and hollow. "It's exactly what it looks like." He sat there, head in his hands, while I stared at him, waiting for the truth, waiting for an apology, an excuse, anything. "How long?" I whispered. 6 months, he said quietly. "I didn't want to hurt you." 6 months. Half a year of lies. Half a year of coming home to me, sleeping next to me, while living a double life. "Why?" I asked, tears burning in the corners of my eyes. "Why would you do this?" He shook his head, looking at the floor. "I don't know. It just happened. Just happened." As if cheating was an accident. As if he'd slipped and fallen into someone else's bed. I stood up, feeling strangely calm, like my emotions had short-circuited. "I want you out," I said quietly. "We're done." He looked up at me, panic flashing across his face. "Wait, please, let's talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about," I whispered, the tears finally spilling over. "You made your choice." He didn't fight me after that. He knew there was nothing left to save. I spent the next few days in a fog, packing his things, blocking his number, cutting him out of my life piece by piece. It hurt more than I thought it would. I kept replaying every moment in my mind, wondering how I hadn't seen it sooner, wondering how I let myself become so blind. But here's the truth. I did see it. I just didn't want to believe it. I told myself the little lies we tell ourselves when we love someone. That everything was fine, that things would get better, that love would be enough to hold us together. It wasn't. If I've learned anything, it's this: trust your gut. If something feels wrong, it usually is. People will lie, they'll twist the truth, they'll make you feel crazy. But deep down, you always know when something's off. The hardest part is listening to yourself. Next time, I won't ignore the signs. Because love shouldn't leave you sitting on the couch at 3 a.m., waiting for someone to come home from a lie. And if it does, it's not love, it's betrayal wrapped in an excuse. This happened about a month ago, and I still can't sleep properly. Every time I close my eyes, I feel like it's going to happen again. I keep telling myself it was just a dream, but it felt too real, too deliberate. It was a quiet Friday night, and I had just come back from a long day at work. I decided to unwind with a movie, popcorn, and a glass of wine. I live alone, and nights like this are usually my favorite. Just me, no distractions, no stress. I made it halfway through the movie when I felt my eyelids getting heavy, and I decided to head to bed. That's when the knocking started. It was so faint at first that I thought I'd imagined it. Just 3 soft knocks on the front door. I live in an apartment on the 3rd floor, and people don't usually knock at that hour. I checked my phone. 1:33 Uhr nachts. I sat up, heart starting to race, and waited to see if it would happen again. A minute passed. 2. Silence. Just as I started convincing myself it was nothing. 3 more knocks. This time, they were louder. I got out of bed, my heart pounding, and slowly made my way to the front door. I stood there for a moment, listening. No footsteps, no voices, just the quiet hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I peeked through the peephole, expecting to see a delivery person or a neighbor, but there was no one there. The hallway was completely empty. A chill ran down my spine. I backed away from the door, convinced it must have been some prank, and went back to bed. I pulled the covers over my head, telling myself it was just some kids messing around. But before I could drift off, knock, 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 I froze. It was coming from inside the apartment. I sat up in bed, every hair on my body standing on end. I could feel it now, that creeping sensation that I wasn't alone. Slowly, I scanned the room, but everything looked the same. Just me, the dresser, the closet door half open, and then it hit me. The closet door wasn't open when I went to bed. My throat tightened. I could feel something inside the room. Something wrong, something waiting. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, that maybe I had left the door open without realizing it. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. And then, from the darkness inside the closet, I heard breathing. It was soft, deliberate, as if whatever was inside was trying to stay quiet, but not quiet enough. It wanted me to know it was there. I stared at the closet, too scared to move, my heart pounding so loudly I thought it might give me away. Then slowly the door began to open. I wanted to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. All I could do was watch as the door swung open, inch by inch, revealing nothing but darkness inside. And then a hand slid out from the shadows. It was pale and thin, with long fingers that curled around the edge of the door like it was testing the air. I felt frozen in place, like my body wasn't mine anymore, as the hand slowly withdrew back into the darkness. Then, from the closet, I heard a voice, soft and raspy, almost like a whisper. "I know you're awake." That was it. I bolted out of bed, grabbed my phone, and ran out of the apartment as fast as I could. I didn't stop until I was standing in the lobby, my hands shaking as I dialed a friend's number. They came to pick me up, and I spent the night at their place. The next morning, I went back to my apartment to grab some things. The closet door was closed. Everything was exactly where I had left it. No sign of anyone or anything being there. But I know what I heard, and I know what I saw. I broke my lease the next week and moved out. I still don't sleep well. Every night, I check the closet in my new place just to make sure it's closed. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, I swear I hear soft knocks coming from inside the walls. And every time I hear them, I hold my breath, because deep down I know it's still looking for me. I've been lying about liking my best friend's fiancé. Not just saying I like him to be polite. I mean full-on pretending that I think he's great, that I'm happy for them, and that I don't see any red flags. But the truth? I think she's making the biggest mistake of her life. Her name's Jess, and we've been best friends since middle school. She's the kind of person who lights up every room she walks into, funny, kind, and the kind of friend who'd drive 2 hours in the middle of the night if you needed her. We've been through everything together: bad boyfriends, terrible jobs, fights with family. She's practically family to me. So when she met Eric 2 years ago and fell for him hard, I wanted to be happy for her. I really did. But from the moment I met him, something about him just didn't sit right with me. It wasn't anything obvious. He was polite, charming even. The kind of guy who says all the right things, knows how to make people like him. But underneath all that, there was something off. At first, I couldn't put my finger on it. He'd make little comments here and there, jokes that felt more like subtle digs at Jess, or stories about his exes that seemed weirdly mean. He played off like he was just joking, but I could see the way Jess's smile faltered whenever he said something like that. I tried telling myself I was just being overprotective. Jess has dated some real losers in the past, and I figured maybe I was just being too harsh, waiting for Eric to mess up. So I kept my mouth shut. I told myself that if Jess was happy, that's all that mattered. But as time went on, the red flags got harder to ignore. He started controlling little things: what she wore, who she hung out with, even how she styled her hair. Jess, being Jess, would laugh it off and say things like, "He's just opinionated," or "He's protective because he cares." But I knew. I could see it happening piece by piece. The way her bright, easygoing personality started to dim around him. The way she'd cancel plans with me more often, saying Eric didn't like her spending so much time with friends. I wanted to scream at her to wake up. I wanted to tell her to run. But every time I tried to bring it up, she'd brush me off. "You just need to get to know him better," she'd say. "He's not like that." So I gave up. I put on the fake smile, nodded at all the right moments, and told her I was happy for her. And then they got engaged. When Jess called to tell me the news, I knew I was supposed to be excited. I was supposed to squeal, ask how he proposed, and talk about wedding plans. But all I felt was this sinking weight in my chest, like watching someone you love walk toward the edge of a cliff, knowing there's nothing you can do to stop them. But I lied anyway. I told her how happy I was, how Eric was perfect for her, how I couldn't wait to help plan the wedding. She cried, thanking me for always being there for her, and I sat on the other end of the line, holding back my own tears. Now, every time we talk about the wedding, it feels like I'm playing a part in a script I didn't write. She sends me pictures of wedding dresses, flower arrangements, and venues, and I smile and say all the right things. I pretend like I'm just as excited as she is, even though inside, I feel like I'm betraying her. I thought maybe, as the wedding got closer, Eric would ease up. Maybe I was wrong about him, and things would get better. But it hasn't. If anything, it's worse. He makes her feel guilty for spending money on the wedding, even though they both have good jobs. He talks down to her in front of their friends, and when she tries to defend herself, he makes it sound like she's being overdramatic. And the way he looks at her sometimes, like she's not enough, makes my skin crawl. But Jess doesn't see it. Or maybe she does, and she just doesn't want to admit it. Either way, she's all in, and I'm standing on the sidelines, watching my best friend marry a man I know will break her heart. I've thought about telling her the truth. I imagine sitting her down and saying, "I don't think Eric is good for you. I don't think you're happy." But what if she doesn't believe me? What if it ruins our friendship? And even if she did believe me, what then? It's not like I can fix things for her. So I keep lying. I tell her the flowers she picked are beautiful, that Eric is lucky to have her, that this wedding is going to be amazing. And every time I say those words, I feel like I'm swallowing glass. The wedding is 2 months away. Invitations have gone out, and deposits have been paid. Jess is in full bride mode, talking about dress fittings and bachelorette parties. She's so excited, and I hate myself for not being able to share that excitement with her. I don't know what I'm going to do. Part of me wants to scream the truth before it's too late, to beg her not to go through with it. But another part of me knows that if I say anything now, it'll feel like betrayal. She loves him. She chose him. And no matter what I say, she's going to marry him. So for now, I keep lying. I keep smiling, keep pretending, keep telling her everything will be okay. Because if I lose her over this, I don't know what I'll do. But every time I think about that wedding, I feel like I'm watching a car crash in slow motion, powerless to stop it. And the hardest part? I know I'll be standing right beside her, holding her bouquet, pretending everything is perfect, because that's what best friends do, right? They lie when the truth would hurt too much. It's been a while since it happened, but the weight of it hasn't gone away. I replay it in my head sometimes, trying to make sense of how I let things get that far. It's one of those mistakes that sneaks up on you, one bad decision after another. And before you know it, you've wrecked everything. It was about 10 months ago. I was 24, working a job that I didn't care about and living back at home, trying to save money. My best friend, Ryan, was the only thing keeping me sane. We'd been close since we were kids, tight enough that I practically lived at his house growing up. His family had always been good to me, and his mom, Marissa, was no exception. Marissa wasn't the kind of mom who faded into the background. She was sharp and funny, always cracking jokes and making us feel welcome. She was in her mid-40s, but she looked younger, fit, confident, and effortlessly beautiful. People noticed her. We all did. But it was never more than just a passing thought because, well, she was Ryan's mom. Some lines aren't meant to be crossed. That's just how it is. Or at least, that's how it was supposed to be. It started on a night when Ryan and I were supposed to go out drinking. I got to his place early, but he texted me saying his girlfriend was having a meltdown and he needed to go help her. "I'll be back in a couple hours," he said. "Just hang at the house." When Marissa answered the door, she smiled in that warm, easy way of hers. "Ryan running late?" she asked, holding the door open for me. "Come on in. I could use some company anyway." We sat in the living room, drinking beers and chatting. At first, it felt like old times, like all the nights I'd spent at their house growing up. But after a couple of beers, the conversation started shifting into deeper territory. She talked about how lonely things had been since her divorce, how strange it felt being in an empty house now that Ryan was always out with his girlfriend. "It's weird," she said, staring into her drink. "You get so used to being needed, and then one day, everyone's just gone." I nodded, feeling the weight in her words. I could tell she wasn't just making small talk. This was the kind of stuff people say when they've been holding it in for too long. "You've turned into such a good guy," she said softly, looking over at me. "I hope you know that." Something shifted in the air between us. It wasn't obvious at first, but I could feel it. This strange, heavy tension that hadn't been there before. I told myself it was just a beer, that I was reading too much into it. But when she reached out and touched my hand, I knew exactly where this was heading. I should have left. I knew I should have. But instead, I stayed. She leaned in slowly, giving me every chance to back away. But I didn't. I kissed her, and the second our lips touched, I knew I was crossing a line I could never come back from. But I didn't stop. Neither of us did. One kiss turned into two, and before I knew it, we were on the couch, tangled up in each other. It felt dangerous and exciting, like we were doing something we knew was wrong, but couldn't resist. My heart was pounding, and my brain was screaming at me to stop, but I didn't. We ended up in her bedroom. It was reckless and messy, and the whole time, the guilt was gnawing at the back of my mind. But in that moment, it didn't matter. None of it mattered. Afterward, we lay there in silence, both of us knowing how badly we'd just screwed up. Marissa looked over at me, gave me a small, tired smile, and said, "No one needs to know. It's just between us, okay?" I nodded, but we both knew it wouldn't be that simple. I left before Ryan got home, telling myself it was a one-time mistake, something we'd both forget and never talk about again. But then a few days later, Marissa texted me, just a simple, "It was nice seeing you," smiley face. I should have ignored it. I knew I should have, but I didn't. I texted her back, and from that moment on, I was stuck in a loop I couldn't get out of. We started sneaking around. Whenever Ryan wasn't home, I'd find myself back at Marissa's place. It wasn't just physical. Either we'd talk, laugh, hang out like we were in some kind of strange, hidden relationship. Every time I left her house, the guilt hit me like a punch to the chest. But I kept going back. I couldn't stop. The worst part? Ryan had no idea. He'd call me to hang out, and we'd joke and drink beers like nothing was wrong. And the whole time, I knew I was lying to his face, betraying him in a way that he'd never forgive if he found out. And then one day he did. It happened on a Sunday afternoon. I was at Marissa's house, sitting on the couch with her, when the front door opened. My heart stopped. Ryan walked in, took one look at us, and everything froze. "What the fuck?" he whispered, his face twisted with confusion and rage. I jumped up, scrambling for an explanation, but there was nothing I could say to make it okay. What excuse could I possibly give? Ryan looked at me, then at his mom, and I saw the exact moment the betrayal hit him. "You been hooking up with my mom?" he asked, his voice low and shaky. I opened my mouth to apologize, but the words wouldn't come out. There was no apology that could fix what I'd done. "Get out," Ryan said quietly, his voice full of hurt. "We're done." I tried to say something, but he cut me off. "I don't ever want to see you again." And just like that, the friendship I thought would last forever was over. I left without another word, knowing I'd just destroyed one of the most important relationships in my life. Ryan blocked me on everything: texts, calls, social media. I haven't seen or heard from him since. As for Marissa, we stopped seeing each other too. Whatever we had, or thought we had, ended the second Ryan found out. And honestly, that was for the best. It's been almost a year now, and not a day goes by that I don't think about it. I threw away years of friendship for something that never should have happened. I knew it was wrong, and I did it anyway. So yeah, that's my story. It's not something I'm proud of, and I know there's no way to fix it. Some mistakes stick with you forever, no matter how much you wish you could take them back. If I've learned one thing, it's this: some lines aren't just crossed, they're burned to the ground. And once you cross them, there's no going back. This happened when I was 14. My parents had gone out of town for the weekend, leaving me home alone for the first time. I wasn't worried. I'd watched enough movies and played enough video games to feel confident I could handle a couple of nights by myself. Plus, we lived in a small, quiet neighborhood. No creepy woods, no old haunted houses, just rows of identical homes with neat lawns and porch lights. The first night went fine. I made myself a frozen pizza, watched TV until late, and fell asleep on the couch with the glow of the screen flickering in the dark. But the second night? That's when things got weird. It was around 11 p.m., and I just finished brushing my teeth when I heard a knock at the front door. It wasn't loud or aggressive, just 3 slow knocks, spaced out. At first, I figured it was one of the neighbors. Maybe someone needed to borrow something, or maybe they were letting me know the porch light was out. It flickered sometimes. But when I looked through the peephole, my stomach dropped. There was no one there. The porch was empty, bathed in the weak glow of the streetlight at the end of the driveway. I stood there for a moment, confused. Maybe the neighborhood kids were pulling a prank? It wouldn't be the first time. I unlocked the door, opened it a crack, and peeked outside. Nothing. The street was silent, the only movement coming from the leaves rustling in the breeze. I shrugged it off, locked the door, and went back to the couch. But then about 10 minutes later, knock, knock, knock. The same pattern, slow, deliberate. This time, I jumped up and ran to the door, hoping to catch whoever it was. I threw the door open, nothing. Just the empty porch, the quiet street, and that uneasy silence that felt too heavy for the night. I stood there for a long moment, trying to convince myself it was just a prank. I even called out, "Okay, real funny. I know you're out there." But no one answered. I shut the door, locked it, and turned on every light in the house. My heart was pounding now, but I kept telling myself it was nothing, just stupid kids messing around. Then I heard it again. Knock, knock, knock. But this time, it wasn't from the front door. It was coming from the back door. My blood ran cold. The back door was on the other side of the house, leading out to a small patio with a wooden fence. No one ever came to the back door. Not neighbors, not delivery people, no one. And there was no way someone could have gotten back there without me hearing them. I grabbed a kitchen knife, my hands shaking, and crept toward the back door. The curtains were drawn over the glass, and for a moment, I debated whether or not to peek. Something deep inside me told me I didn't want to see what was out there, but I couldn't just ignore it either. I took a deep breath, reached out, and pulled the curtain back just an inch. There was someone standing on the patio. They were facing the door, standing completely still. I couldn't see their face. The porch light was casting shadows across their body, but they were wearing a long coat that almost brushed the ground. Their head was slightly tilted, as if they were waiting. I stepped back from the door, my heart hammering in my chest. The knife felt useless in my hand. I didn't know what to do. Should I call the police? Call my parents? I didn't want to sound like a scared kid, but I knew something wasn't right. And then they knocked again. Soft, deliberate. 3 slow taps. I backed away from the door, every nerve in my body screaming at me to run. But I couldn't look away. I stood there, frozen, watching through the crack in the curtain as the figure slowly raised a hand and waved. It wasn't a friendly wave. It was slow, deliberate, and unsettling, like they knew I was watching and wanted me to know they weren't going anywhere. I bolted upstairs, locked myself in my bedroom, and dialed 911 with shaking fingers. The dispatcher's voice was calm, but I could barely get the words out. I told her someone was outside my house, that they were knocking on my doors and wouldn't leave. She said officers were on their way, but I couldn't stay on the line. I was too scared that if I made any noise, they'd hear me. I sat there, curled up on the floor next to my bed, every light in the house still on, listening for more knocks. But after a few minutes, the knocking stopped. And then came the worst part. The doorknob rattled. It was soft at first, just a slight jiggle like they were testing it. Then it got more forceful, as if they were trying to open the door without making too much noise. I clutched the phone tighter, my entire body frozen with fear. And then it stopped, just like that. I didn't dare move. I sat there, every muscle in my body tensed, waiting for the sound to come back. But all I could hear was my own breathing and the distant hum of the refrigerator downstairs. It felt like hours before the police finally showed up. When I heard the knock at the front door, I almost cried with relief. I ran down the stairs, unlocked the door, and practically threw myself into the arms of the officer standing there. They checked the entire house, every room, every corner, but there was no sign of anyone. No footprints, no marks on the doors, nothing. It was like no one had been there at all. But I know what I saw. Before the officers left, one of them pulled me aside and said, "Are you sure it wasn't just a dream? Sometimes, when you're alone, your mind can play tricks on you." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But then he said something that made my blood run cold. "Weird thing, though," he added, almost as an afterthought. "Your back door? It was unlocked when we got here." I didn't sleep that night. I didn't sleep for the next few nights either. I kept every light in the house on, every door locked, and every curtain drawn. I never told my parents what happened. I didn't want them to think I couldn't handle being alone. But to this day, whenever I hear a knock at the door late at night, my heart skips a beat. Because whoever, or whatever, was at my house that night, they knew I was home. Let me tell you the story of how I almost died because of a hammock. Yeah, a hammock. One of those things that's supposed to symbolize relaxation, sipping lemonade, and peaceful naps in the sun. But let me assure you, that thing was a trap, waiting for the right moment to strike. It happened during a weekend camping trip with a couple of friends. We'd driven out to this gorgeous forest spot by a lake, planning to spend the weekend roasting marshmallows, drinking beer, and pretending we knew how to survive in the wilderness. One of my friends had brought along a hammock, one of those fancy ones with straps and carabiners that you're supposed to secure between 2 trees. Now, I'm not much of an outdoorsman. I can set up a tent if the instructions are idiot-proof, and I know how to roast a hot dog without catching it on fire, most of the time. But this hammock? It was calling to me. I thought, why sleep on the hard ground when I could gently sway under the stars like a majestic forest king? So I decided to set it up. Simple enough, right? Find 2 trees, attach the straps, and boom, hammock heaven. Except it didn't go that smoothly. I found what I thought were 2 perfect trees, maybe 10 feet apart. I wrapped the straps around each trunk, pulled them tight, and hooked the carabiners onto the hammock. Everything looked great. I gave it a little test tug, and it seemed solid. This is going to be amazing, I told myself, already imagining the glorious nap I was about to take. I climbed into the hammock with all the grace of a drunken sloth, and that's when I noticed the first problem. The thing was way higher off the ground than I thought. My butt barely touched the fabric, and suddenly my feet were dangling 3 feet off the ground. I tried to shuffle further into the hammock, but it felt like I was trying to wrestle with a giant, stretchy taco. Somehow, I managed to get my whole body inside and lay back. And for a brief, fleeting moment, everything was perfect. I was swaying gently between two trees, the sun peeking through the leaves, birds chirping in the distance. Pure bliss. And then the disaster began. I shifted my weight just a little, mind you, trying to adjust my position. That's when one of the straps gave a horrifying creak. Before I could react, the entire hammock tilted to one side, and I started sliding out of it like an egg off a frying pan. I panicked and tried to grab the sides of the hammock, but the more I struggled, the worse it got. My body tipped further and further until whoosh, I was hanging upside down, my legs tangled in the fabric. Now, here's the thing about being upside down in a hammock. You don't get out gracefully. Gravity takes over, and you are completely at its mercy. My legs were wrapped in the fabric like some kind of sad burrito, and I couldn't tell if I was more embarrassed or terrified. But before I could even try to right myself, I made the fatal mistake. I yanked on the strap to pull myself upright. That was all it took. The strap snapped off the tree with a sickening pop, and I plummeted straight to the ground, head first. The next thing I knew, I was lying flat on my back in the dirt, stunned, staring up at the sky, trying to figure out if I was still alive. I could hear my friends laughing from across the campsite, and all I could think was, this is it. I've just given myself a neck injury over a stupid hammock. But wait, it gets worse. As I was lying there, tangled in the hammock like a defeated piñata, the other strap, because it wasn't done with me yet, snapped too. The carabiner flew off the tree like a tiny metal missile and smacked me right in the shin. So now, not only was I lying there, dazed and humiliated, but I was also in actual pain, with a brand new welt forming on my leg. My friends came running over, still laughing, of course, and one of them managed to gasp out, "Dude, are you okay?" I wanted to tell them no, that I was emotionally and physically destroyed, but all I could do was mutter, "I think the hammock tried to kill me." It took two of them to untangle me from the mess of fabric and straps. By the time they pulled me free, I was covered in dirt, bruised all over, and limping from where the carabiner had hit me. And the hammock? It just lay there, smug and lifeless on the ground like it had won. I spent the rest of the night sitting by the fire, sulking with an ice pack on my shin while my friends roasted marshmallows and made jokes at my expense. Every time I shifted in my seat, one of them would say, "Careful, don't want to fall out of your chair, too," and then burst into laughter all over again. So, what's the lesson here? Never trust a hammock. They look innocent, but they're just waiting for the perfect moment to betray you. And if you ever feel tempted to climb into one, make sure you double-check those straps. Your dignity, and possibly your life, depends on it. These days, I avoid hammocks entirely. If someone suggests setting one up, I suddenly remember I have somewhere else to be. Because once you've been ambushed by a piece of fabric in the forest, you never really look at them the same way. So, my first night as a dancer was honestly a disaster wrapped in a life lesson. I had no idea what I was doing. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong, and I almost quit halfway through. But somehow, I made it out in one piece, and with a little cash in my bra, which was more than I expected. I was 24, drowning in bills, and working at a coffee shop that barely paid enough to keep the lights on. Every day felt like a slow spiral. Wake up, work a double shift, come home too exhausted to think, and do it all over again the next day. I've been stuck in that cycle for months, and it felt like there was no way out. One day, I was venting to my friend Maya, who worked as a dancer. I always thought she was kind of fearless, like nothing ever seemed to faze her. When I told her how broke I was, she said, "Why don't you try dancing? You're cute, and it's good money if you can deal with some weirdos." At first, I laughed it off, but after another week of dodging late payment notices and eating ramen every night, the idea didn't seem so ridiculous. I figured, why not? If it was awful, I could walk out and never look back. So one Thursday afternoon, I called a club downtown, the Midnight Lounge, and asked if they were hiring. The manager told me to come in that night. No experience? Doesn't matter, he said. Just smile and shake your ass. Easier said than done, buddy. I spent the next few hours trying not to panic. I didn't own stripper shoes or sexy outfits, so I put on a black bra, some lace shorts, and the tallest heels I could find in my closet. They were more bachelorette party than stripper chic, but I figured it was close enough. I did my makeup way too heavy, drank a shot of tequila for courage, and made my way to the club. When I walked in, my nerves were through the roof. The place was darker and dingier than I expected, with neon lights flickering over red velvet couches and a haze of cigarette smoke floating in the air. I could feel every eye on me as I walked in, which only made me more self-conscious. The manager, a guy named Frankie, greeted me at the bar. He had slick back hair, a loose tie, and looked like he lived off Red Bull and bad decisions. "You the new girl?" he asked. I stammered. "Cool. You're up in 15. And just like that, I was thrown into the deep end. No training, no tips, no warm-up. Just get on stage and good luck. In the dressing room, I met a couple of the other dancers. They looked like they'd been doing this forever. Perfect hair, flawless makeup, and outfits that sparkled under the lights. One of them, a tall girl named Jade, gave me a once-over and smirked. "First night?" she asked. "Is it that obvious?" I muttered, trying not to sound as scared as I felt. "Don't sweat it," she said, adjusting her fishnet tights. "Everyone's a mess their first time. Just don't fall on your face, and you'll be fine." Great. Fantastic advice. Before I had a chance to overthink it, the DJ called my name. "Let's hear it for Lola." Yes, I panicked when Frankie asked me for a stage name earlier. Lola was the first thing that popped into my head, and I regretted it instantly. I stumbled out onto the stage, blinded by the neon lights and deafened by the bass-heavy music. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. I grabbed the pole like it was the only thing keeping me upright and tried to do a simple spin. And guess what? I ate it. Like fully lost my grip and landed on my knees in the most awkward, painful way possible. A few guys in the front row laughed, and I wanted to disappear right then and there. But instead, I did what Jade told me. I kept going. I stood up, flipped my hair, and acted like falling was just part of the routine. The rest of the set was rough. I swayed awkwardly, did a half-assed shimmy, and tried not to trip over my own feet. But somehow, a few guys threw singles onto the stage. Not a lot, maybe $12 total, but I scooped them up like they were gold and practically ran off the stage as soon as the song ended. Back in the dressing room, Jade was waiting for me, laughing. "Not bad, newbie. You didn't cry, so you're already doing better than some." I forced a smile, trying to act like my dignity wasn't lying in pieces on the stage. The rest of the night was chaotic. I managed to offer a few lap dances, though they were far from smooth. My first customer was this nervous guy who kept asking, "Is this okay? Am I doing this right?" I wanted to tell him, "Dude, I don't know either," but instead, I just smiled and said, "You're doing great." He tipped me $30, so I called it a win. Then there was the creep. Every club has one. This guy reeked of whiskey and kept trying to grab me even after I told him no 3 times. I ended the dance early, stood up, and walked away before I could lose my temper. Frankie noticed and gave me a quick nod like, "Good call." It felt good to know I wouldn't get in trouble for setting boundaries, at least. By the time my shift ended, I was exhausted, physically, mentally, and emotionally. My feet were killing me, my thighs were sore from clinging to the pole, and I was pretty sure I had glitter stuck in my hair and my soul. But when I counted my tips, $1.60, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: pride. It wasn't a ton of money, but it was more than I'd made in a week in my last job. And the fact that I survived the night without completely falling apart, that felt like a victory. Walking out of the club with cash stuffed into my bra, I felt different. Not confident, exactly, but like I'd done something that scared the hell out of me and lived to tell the tale. I'd step way outside my comfort zone and come out the other side stronger. I went back the next night, and the night after that. It got easier. I learned how to move without tripping, how to talk to customers without feeling awkward, and how to spot the good tippers from a mile away. I even started to have fun with it. Well, most of the time, not every night was great, but it gave me the freedom I desperately needed. After about 6 months, I decided to move on. But those months taught me more than I ever expected. About myself, about boundaries, and about confidence. I learned how to stand my ground, how to hustle, and how to fake confidence until it felt real. So yeah, my first night was an absolute mess. But it was also the beginning of something that made me stronger than I ever thought I could be. And honestly, I wouldn't trade that experience for anything. We were together for nearly 3 years. Not the longest relationship in the world, but long enough that I thought we were serious. Real. The kind of relationship where you could stop worrying about all the little things and start planning a future. I thought I knew him, his moods, his tells, all his little quirks. I thought we were safe. Turns out I didn't know him at all. It started with the little things. I know that sounds cliche, but it's true. The shift was subtle, just a slight change in the way he acted. He was always the kind of guy who'd lean into me on the couch, send random texts during the day just to make me laugh, or suggest spontaneous weekend getaways. But one day, that version of him started to fade. He became quieter. Not cold exactly, just distracted like his mind was somewhere else. When I asked if everything was okay, he'd say, "Yeah, just stressed with work." That answer was his go-to for months. And every time I heard it, I convinced myself it made sense. Life gets busy. Work gets overwhelming. I didn't want to make it a big deal, so I let it slide. But then came the phone. And as you already know, once the phone behavior changes, things are never the same. He used to be so open with it. He'd toss it on the coffee table without a second thought, asking me to answer texts for him while he cooked. If it buzzed, he didn't care who looked. But now it was different. The phone was always face down, always in his pocket. If it buzzed, he'd glance at the screen quickly, locking it before I could even ask who it was. I remember the first time I noticed the change. We were watching TV, and his phone buzzed. Out of habit, I leaned over to see who it was. Nothing sketchy, just muscle memory. But before I could even register the notification, he picked it up, swiped it away, and said, "It's just work." Just work. That excuse was starting to feel too familiar. Still, I told myself not to be one of those people. The ones who snoop and get paranoid over nothing. Relationships are built on trust, right? So I swallowed the uneasy feeling and moved on. But the gym thing, that was harder to ignore. One day, out of nowhere, he decided to start going to the gym. Every day. No warning, no lead up, just a sudden obsession. And it wasn't just the workouts. It was the whole package. New clothes, fresh haircuts, even cologne. He wasn't just exercising. He was transforming. And it wasn't for me. When I joked about it. "What, you trying to become a fitness model now?" He just shrugged. "I want to feel good about myself," he said. It sounded reasonable. It was reasonable. But that didn't stop the pit from forming in my stomach. It was the nights out that finally pushed me over the edge. He used to be the kind of guy who'd rather stay in with me than go out. But lately, he had a social calendar I wasn't a part of. Drinks with coworkers, meetups with friends, work dinners. It was always the same. Don't wait up. And I didn't for a while. But as the nights out became more frequent, I couldn't ignore that sinking feeling any longer. Then came the accusations, and that's when I knew things were spiraling. He started questioning me. "Who were you texting last night?" he asked one day, totally out of the blue. "You seem kind of distant. Are you hiding something?" I stared at him, stunned. I was the one being distant? I was the one acting off? I was the one hiding something? It felt like I'd stepped into a parallel universe where I was the villain in my own relationship. That's when it clicked. He was projecting all the secrecy, the defensiveness, the weird phone habits. It wasn't about me. It was about him. But even then, I wasn't ready to confront it. Not yet. The night everything finally fell apart, he told me he was meeting some friends for drinks. "It'll be a late one," he said, pulling on a new shirt I'd never seen before. He kissed me on the forehead, an absent, automatic gesture, and walked out the door. As soon as he left, I sat down on the couch, my heart pounding. I couldn't shake the feeling that this night was different. Something about the way he left felt final, like he was stepping out of one life and into another. I stared at my phone for a long time, my hands shaking, until I finally gave in and opened the location tracker. We'd shared our locations for years, for convenience, for safety. I told myself I was just checking for peace of mind. He wasn't at the bar. He was at a hotel across town. For a moment, the world tilted, and I couldn't breathe. I refreshed the screen over and over, praying it was a glitch. But the blinking dot stayed right where it was. When he came home at 2 a.m., smelling like alcohol and perfume that wasn't mine, I was sitting on the couch waiting. He froze when he saw me. "You're still up?" he asked, trying to sound casual, but his voice cracked. "How was the bar?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, even though I felt like I was breaking inside. He hesitated, just for a second before saying it was fine. I held up my phone, the location app still open. Do you want to try that again? His face went pale. For a moment, he looked like he might try to lie, but then the fight left him. He slumped down on the edge of the couch, burying his face in his hands. It's not what you think, he whispered. I laughed, but it came out bitter and broken. It's exactly what I think. How long? I asked quietly, even though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. For months, he mumbled. For months. 4 months of sneaking around, lying to my face, coming home to me while being with someone else. Why? I asked, my voice cracking. Why would you do this? He shook his head. I don't know. It just happened. I stood up, my heart shattering into pieces I knew I'd never be able to put back together. Get out, I whispered. We're done. He tried to apologize, but I didn't want to hear it. There was nothing he could say that would fix what he'd broken. It's been months now, and some days are better than others. But the hardest part isn't the betrayal. It's realizing how long I ignored the signs. I knew, deep down, that something was wrong. I just didn't want to believe it. If I've learned anything, it's this: trust your gut. If something feels off, it usually is. People will lie to your face, twist the truth, make you feel like you're crazy. But your instincts, they never lie. Next time, I won't ignore the signs. Because love shouldn't make you feel like you're losing your mind. And if it does, it's not love. It's betrayal wearing a mask. For the last 6 months, I've been secretly talking to my ex. My partner has no idea. It didn't start out as anything serious, just a friendly text here and there. Hey, how have you been? Message after stumbling across an old photo. But slowly, those little check-ins turned into full conversations. And now, I'm talking to him almost every day. I know how bad this sounds. I know that if my partner found out, it would break their heart. But the worst part is, I don't even know why I'm doing it. It's not like I want to get back together with my ex. I love my partner, really I do. They're patient, supportive, and good to me in ways I've never experienced before. But somehow, talking to my ex feels comforting, familiar, like slipping on an old sweater you forgot you loved. We broke up 2 years ago, and it was messy. We fought all the time, big fights, ugly ones. There was no closure, just silence. For months, I hated him. I told myself that he was toxic, that I was better off without him, and I genuinely believed that. I moved on, or at least I thought I had. Then, out of nowhere, he messaged me. It was just one line: saw something today that reminded me of you. Hope you're doing well. I stared at that message for what felt like hours, trying to decide what to do. I knew the right thing was to delete it and move on, but instead I responded. And just like that, the door I thought I'd closed for good swung wide open. At first, it was harmless. We caught up, talked about what we'd been up to, how life had changed since the breakup. He told me he was in therapy, working on himself, trying to become a better person. I told him I was happy with someone new, building a life that felt stable and safe. He said he was glad for me, genuinely glad, and that made me feel warm in a way I wasn't expecting. But as the weeks went by, our conversations got deeper. We started reminiscing about the good times, those perfect moments buried under the rubble of our fights. The late-night drives, the weekends spent doing nothing, the way we used to make each other laugh until we couldn't breathe. And with every conversation, I felt myself slipping further into the past. It's not like we've crossed any physical lines. We haven't flirted or talked about meeting up. But emotionally, I know I've already crossed a line. I think about him all the time, what he's doing, how he's feeling, whether he still thinks about me when I'm not texting him. And every time my phone buzzes with a message from him, my heart skips in a way it shouldn't. The worst part is my partner has no idea. They think everything between us is perfect. They trust me completely. And every time they look at me with that soft, loving gaze, I feel like I'm drowning in guilt. I tell myself that I need to stop, that one more conversation with my ex is one too many. But then he texts, and I respond without even thinking. I know I'm playing with fire. I know that if my partner ever found out, it would devastate them. They've been through a lot of heartbreak in the past, and I promised that I would never hurt them. But here I am, carrying on a secret relationship in the shadows, lying every time I say, nothing's going on. I don't even know what I want from my ex. Closure? Redemption? Some part of me wonders if I just missed the version of myself I was when I was with him. The reckless, passionate person who felt everything so intensely. My life now is steady, calm, and good. But sometimes, it feels like I'm watching myself from the outside, wondering if I traded excitement for security. I've thought about coming clean, telling my partner the truth. But how do you say, I've been talking to my ex for months because I don't know how to let go? There's no way to say that without shattering everything we've built. And the truth is, I don't want to lose them. I just don't know how to stop. I keep telling myself that I'll end it soon, that I'll send one last message and delete his number for good. But every time I try, I hesitate. What if I regret it? What if I need him again someday? What if letting him go for real feels worse than the guilt of keeping him around? So I stay trapped in this in-between. I keep talking to my ex, keep pretending everything is fine with my partner, and keep hoping that somehow this will all resolve itself without me having to make a choice. But deep down, I know that's not how this works. One day, the truth will come out. Whether I confess or my partner stumbles across the messages, it's only a matter of time. And when that day comes, I'll have to face the fallout. But for now, I keep both doors open. One foot in the past, one in the present. And every day, the space between them gets smaller, tighter, like a noose slowly closing around my neck. I know I can't stay here forever, but I'm terrified to take the first step because no matter which way I go, someone's heart is going to break. I've gone over it 1,000 times in my head, wondering how it got so out of hand. There were so many chances to stop, so many moments where I could have made the right decision. But I didn't. And now everything I cared about is gone. It happened earlier this summer. I was 26, still trying to figure out what the hell I was doing with my life. My job was going nowhere. I wasn't dating anyone, and every day felt the same. The only thing that kept me grounded was my best friend, Brandon. We'd been inseparable since high school, more like brothers than friends. His house had always been my safe space, and his family treated me like one of their own. Especially his mom, Heather. Heather was different. She wasn't like the other moms we knew growing up. She was warm, funny, and always had this laid-back vibe. She was in her 40s but looked younger, athletic, with an easy smile that made her seem like she was always in control. Guys used to joke about how good-looking she was, but it never really meant anything. She was Brandon's mom, completely off-limits. I thought that rule was so obvious that it couldn't be broken. Until I broke it. It started on a random Friday night. Brandon invited me over to hang out, just like old times. When I showed up, though, he was rushing out the door, saying his girlfriend had locked her keys in the car and needed him to come help. "I'll be back in a couple hours," he said. "Just chill here. My mom's home. She won't mind." I went inside, figuring I'd wait for him. Heather was in the living room, sitting on the couch with a glass of wine and a book. When she saw me, she smiled warmly. "Oh, hey, Brandon told me you were coming over." She waved me in. "Come sit. I could use the company." We started talking, just catching up at first. But after a while, the conversation got deeper, more personal. She told me how strange it felt living alone now that Brandon was always with his girlfriend. How she never realized how lonely the house could feel once the kids were grown. "You know," she said, swirling her wine, "I used to love the quiet. But now it's different. It's too quiet." There was a weight to her words that I couldn't ignore. I nodded, not sure how to respond. It was the kind of thing you say to someone you trust, someone you feel safe with. And in that moment, I felt the shift, like something was changing between us. "You've really grown up," she said softly, her eyes lingering on me for just a second too long. "You've turned into a handsome young man. I bet you don't even realize it." My heart started racing. It was such a simple compliment, but the way she said it made it feel like more. There was a tension in the air now, heavy and unmistakable. I knew exactly where this was heading, and every instinct I had told me to get up and leave. But I didn't. Instead, I stayed. The next thing I knew, Heather reached out and rested her hand on mine. It was such a small gesture, but it felt like a point of no return. My head was screaming at me to back away, but my body wasn't listening. I leaned in, and before I knew it, I kissed her. She didn't pull away. She kissed me back, and just like that, every line we weren't supposed to cross shattered. One kiss led to another, and before I could even think about what I was doing, we were in her bedroom. It all happened so fast, like I was caught in a storm I couldn't fight. It felt reckless, dangerous, and completely wrong. But it also felt electric. In that moment, nothing else existed. No rules, no consequences, no friendship with Brandon. Just her and me. Afterward, we lay there in silence, both of us knowing exactly how badly we'd just messed up. Heather turned to me, brushing my hair back with a small smile. "We'll keep this between us, right?" she whispered. "Just this once." I nodded, but I knew it was a lie. It wasn't going to be just once, and it wasn't. A few days later, she texted me. "It was nice seeing you the other night." Smiley face. It was such a harmless message on the surface, but we both knew what it meant. And instead of shutting it down, I went back. Again and again. It became a routine. Whenever Brandon wasn't around, I'd sneak over to her house. It wasn't just about the physical stuff, though that was definitely part of it. We talked. We laughed. It felt easy in a way it shouldn't have, like we were in some kind of secret relationship. But every time I saw Brandon, the guilt ate away at me. He had no idea what was going on behind his back, and the longer it went on, the worse it felt. I knew it couldn't last. I knew it was only a matter of time before everything blew up. And of course it did. One night, I was at Heather's house. We were sitting on the couch, way too close for it to look innocent, when the front door swung open. My heart dropped. It was Brandon. He stood there in the doorway, his face shifting from confusion to disbelief to pure rage in a matter of seconds. "What the fuck is going on?" he shouted, his voice trembling with anger. I jumped up trying to explain, but what was I going to say? "Sorry, man. I've been sleeping with your mom behind your back." There was no explanation that could make this right. "You've been hooking up with my mom?" he whispered, his voice low and full of hurt. I tried to apologize, but the words felt hollow. There was nothing I could say to make it better. "Get out," Brandon said, his voice cold and final. "We're done." And just like that, the best friendship I ever had was gone. I left without another word, knowing I just burned every bridge between us. I tried reaching out after that, texts, calls, messages on social media. But Brandon blocked me on everything. I haven't heard from him since. As for Heather, we stopped talking too. Whatever we had, whatever it was, ended the second Brandon found out. And honestly, that was for the best. It's been months now, and I still think about it every day. How easily I threw away a decade of friendship for something that never should have happened. I knew better. I knew it was wrong from the start, and I did it anyway. So yeah, that's my story. I don't expect sympathy, and I know there's no fixing it. Some mistakes stick with you forever, no matter how much you wish you could take them back. If I've learned one thing, it's this: once you cross a line like that, there's no going back. Some things once broken stay broken forever. Let me tell you how I almost died because of a toaster. Yep, that little kitchen appliance most people use to make their morning toast almost sent me to the pearly gates. And the worst part? It wasn't even my toaster. It happened when I was house-sitting for a friend. They'd gone out of town for a week and asked me to watch their place and feed their cat. Easy enough, right? The cat was cool, the place was cozy, and I figured I'd help myself to some breakfast in their kitchen because free food is the best kind of food. So, on my second morning there, I decided I was going to make some toast. I found a loaf of bread in their pantry, popped 2 slices into the toaster, and hit the lever. Simple. No drama. I leaned against the counter, scrolling through my phone, waiting for that perfect golden brown toast to pop up. Except it never popped up. I stood there for a good 2 minutes, staring at the toaster, wondering what was taking so long. I figured maybe it was one of those old-school toasters, the kind that takes longer to heat up, but something about it felt off. The smell was starting to change. Not the delicious, warm scent of toasting bread, but the burnt plastic kind of smell. You know, the kind that makes your brain go, oh. I leaned in closer and noticed a thin wisp of smoke curling out of the top of the toaster. Not steam. Not oops, I overcooked my toast smoke. Real smoke. I yanked the lever up, expecting the toast to pop out, but nothing. No movement. Just the smell of something burning, getting stronger by the second. Now, at this point, I should have just unplugged the toaster. That would have been the smart, responsible thing to do. But instead, in a moment of pure stupidity, I decided to stick a butter knife into the slot to try and pry the toast out. Yes, I know, bad idea. The second the metal knife touched the inside of the toaster, everything went to hell. There was this violent spark, like I just created a tiny lightning storm inside the appliance. The whole toaster exploded with a loud pop, and the knife flew out of my hand like it had been launched by a slingshot. And me? I jumped back so fast that I slipped on the tile floor, my feet flying out from under me like I was in a slapstick comedy. I hit the ground hard, landing on my side with a thud that knocked the wind out of me. Meanwhile, the toaster, because it wasn't done ruining my life yet, started sparking again. At this point, my survival instincts finally kicked in. I scrambled to my feet, grabbed the toaster's cord, and yanked it out of the wall as fast as I could. The sparking stopped instantly, and the room was dead silent except for the sound of my own panicked breathing. And then, just to add insult to injury, the toast finally popped out, charred to a crisp, black as coal. The 2 slices flew out of the toaster and hit the counter with a sad little plop. I stood there, heart pounding, covered in sweat, with my side throbbing from the fall, just staring at the smoldering remains of my breakfast. I couldn't believe I'd almost electrocuted myself over 2 lousy pieces of toast. And here's the kicker. The cat, who had been watching this entire disaster unfold, walked into the kitchen, sat down on the counter, and gave me this look like, "Really? This is who they trusted to watch me?" After a few minutes of standing there in shock, I cleaned up the mess, because no way was I leaving any evidence of this near-death experience for my friend to find. I stuffed the toaster in a trash bag and threw it into the garage, pretending it had never existed. As far as I was concerned, the toaster was dead to me, and I didn't care if my friend ever noticed it missing. For the rest of the week, I lived off cereal. No more toaster, no more bread, just me, the cat, and the crushing realization that I had almost been killed by breakfast. So, here's the lesson. Don't mess with toasters. If your toast gets stuck, leave it stuck. Just throw the whole thing away and move on with your life. No snack is worth getting electrocuted for. To this day, every time I use my own toaster, I treat it like it's a live grenade. If anything gets stuck, that toaster is dead to me. I've made my peace with cold bread. It's better than explaining to paramedics why I tried to joust with a kitchen appliance. This happened last Friday, and I still don't know if I've processed it yet. I've gone over it again and again, trying to convince myself it wasn't real, that it couldn't have been, but I know it was, and I know whatever it was, it isn't finished with me. It was supposed to be a normal night. I work late shifts at a small office building downtown, and by the time I clocked out, it was just past 2 a.m. The drive home is usually quiet and uneventful. Just me, the empty streets, and the occasional late-night radio show. That night, I took the same route I always do, a few city streets, a long stretch of highway, and then a couple of winding roads leading to my apartment. I had the windows cracked, letting the cool air keep me awake. But as I merged onto the highway, I noticed something strange. There was a car behind me. At first, I didn't think much of it. Lots of people are out late, and it's not unusual to see a few cars on the highway. But this one, it didn't feel right. It was following me close. Too close. The kind of close that makes your stomach churn. I switched lanes just to see if they'd pass me. They didn't. They stayed right behind me, their headlights burning into my rearview mirror. I told myself it was just some impatient driver. But the longer I drove, the more nervous I became. Every turn I made, every lane I changed, they stayed with me, matching my speed perfectly. I tried to shake them by taking an early exit off the highway. It was a route I rarely used, a long, narrow road cutting through a wooded area. I thought for sure they'd stay on the highway. But when I glanced in the mirror, the headlights were still there. They followed me off the exit. My heart started racing. This wasn't just a coincidence. They were following me. The road was dark and empty, with thick trees pressing in from both sides. The car behind me kept its distance now, just far enough that I couldn't make out the driver, but close enough that I knew they were still there. And then the worst thing happened. My headlights flickered, just for a second, but long enough for my heart to drop into my stomach. The engine sputtered, just once, and the dashboard lights dimmed. For the briefest moment, the whole car felt like it had been pulled through a thick layer of static. like reality itself had glitched. And then everything snapped back to normal. The engine roared, the lights came back, and the road stretched out in front of me again. But when I glanced in the rearview mirror, the other car was gone. The headlights gone. The road behind me, empty. Just darkness, stretching as far as I could see. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. Maybe they'd turned off somewhere without me noticing. Maybe I was just tired, and my brain was making everything feel worse than it really was. I kept driving, the road winding deeper into the forest. The radio buzzed softly in the background, some late-night talk show droning on about conspiracy theories. I let the sound wash over me, trying to shake the weird feeling that clung to my skin like cold mist. And then, just as I thought I was in the clear, the radio cut out. For a second, there was nothing but silence. Heavy, oppressive silence. And then, through the static, I heard it. A voice. It wasn't coming from the radio. It was coming from inside the car. "You shouldn't have come this way." The voice was low and raspy, almost a whisper, like someone sitting just behind me, their lips inches from my ear. I slammed the brakes, the car skidding slightly on the wet road. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear my own breath. I twisted around in the seat, phone flashlight in hand, and aimed it at the back seat. There was no one there. Nothing. Just an empty seat and a lingering chill that made my skin crawl. I whipped back around, threw the car into drive, and floored it. The road blurred beneath my tires as I sped through the forest, desperate to get out of there. Then, as I rounded a sharp bend, I saw it. The other car. It was parked on the side of the road, lights off, as if it had been waiting for me. And standing next to it, in the glow of my headlights, was a figure. It was the same figure I'd seen in the rearview mirror, the one I hadn't dared to turn around and look for. They were tall, unnaturally tall, with long, spindly limbs that hung awkwardly from their frame. Their face was hidden in shadow, but I could see the glint of their eyes, too wide, too bright, and locked directly onto me. They smiled, not with joy, not with malice, just knowing, like they'd been expecting me all along. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. I veered around the car, my heart slamming against my ribs, and kept driving, praying I wouldn't see them again. But as I passed, the figure waved. It was a slow, deliberate wave, like someone saying goodbye to an old friend. And then, just as my taillights swept over them, they mouthed two words. "See you." I didn't stop driving until I reached my apartment. I parked the car, ran inside, and locked every door and window. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even turn off the lights. And now, every time I get into my car, I check the back seat. Every time I pass that stretch of road, I hold my breath, hoping I won't see them again. But I know I will. One day, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but one day they'll be there, waiting for me. And next time, they won't just wave. This happened 2 weeks ago, and I haven't been able to shake the feeling that it's not over. I keep trying to tell myself it was nothing, just my imagination. But deep down, I know it wasn't. Something happened that night, and I don't know if I'll ever understand it. It was a typical Thursday night. I had stayed late at work and didn't get home until around 11 p.m. By the time I ate and got ready for bed, it was almost midnight. I live alone in a small one-bedroom apartment, so it's usually pretty quiet at night. I turned off the lights, crawled into bed, and lay there scrolling through my phone for a bit before deciding to call it a night. Just as I was about to fall asleep, I heard the door to my apartment unlock. At first, I thought I imagined it. I lay perfectly still, listening, hoping I was wrong. But then I heard the unmistakable sound of the door creaking open. My heart started racing. I was positive I had locked it. I sat up slowly, every muscle in my body tense, straining to hear any more movement. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. And then, soft footsteps on the hardwood floor. I reached for my phone, but my hand was shaking so badly I could barely grip it. I stared at the bedroom door, which was slightly ajar, watching as the shadows on the other side shifted ever so slightly. Someone or something was inside my apartment. I wanted to call the police, but I was frozen, paralyzed by the overwhelming sense that if I made a sound, whatever was out there would come straight for me. The footsteps stopped just outside the bedroom door, and then the door began to open. It was slow, deliberate, like whoever was on the other side wanted me to see it coming. I held my breath, heart pounding so hard I thought it might give me away. The door swung open just enough for me to see a figure standing in the dark. It wasn't moving. It just stood there, perfectly still, watching me. The figure was tall, with a strange, almost lopsided posture, like it didn't quite fit into its own body. I couldn't make out its face, but I could feel its eyes, cold, unblinking, locked on me. Then, in the quiet, it whispered, "I've been waiting." Every instinct in my body told me to run, but I couldn't. I was trapped, frozen in place, staring at the thing in my doorway. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there, as if it had all the time in the world. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it stepped back into the darkness and closed the door behind it. I sat there in the silence, too scared to move, waiting to see if it would come back. But the apartment stayed quiet. After what felt like hours, I finally worked up the courage to grab my phone and turn on the flashlight. When I opened the door, the hallway was empty. The front door was still locked from the inside. I searched the entire apartment, every corner, every closet, but there was no one there. No sign that anyone had entered. No sign that anything had changed. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch, every light in the apartment on, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it had been a dream, some strange, vivid nightmare brought on by stress. But I know that's not true, because ever since that night, I've felt like I'm not alone. Sometimes when I'm sitting in the living room, I catch movement out of the corner of my eye, a shadow slipping just out of view. Other times, I wake up in the middle of the night, certain that someone is standing over my bed. And the worst part? Every night, at exactly 3 a.m., the bedroom door swings open, just a crack. I always get up and close it. And every time, I tell myself it's just the wind or the building settling. But deep down, I know better. It's still here, and it's still waiting. This happened a few months ago when I was staying at my grandmother's house. She lives in a small, rural town, one of those places where everyone knows each other and nothing exciting ever happens. Her house sits at the end of a long gravel road, surrounded by thick woods on 3 sides. It's quiet, isolated, and peaceful, at least during the day. But at night? At night, it's a different story. The first night I stayed there, everything seemed fine. We had dinner, watched TV, and I went to bed around 11 p.m. My grandmother went to bed even earlier. She's old school, always asleep by 9 and up before sunrise. She had already reminded me, "Make sure you lock the front door before you go to sleep." I promised I would, though it felt like overkill. It would come all the way out here. The guest room where I slept was small but cozy, with a window that looked out into the backyard and the edge of the forest beyond. As I lay there in bed, scrolling through my phone, the house felt calm. I could hear the faint creak of the old wooden floors and the occasional rustling of the trees outside. Nothing unusual. Until around 1 a.m., I heard a knock. It was soft, 3 gentle taps, almost like the sound of someone politely knocking on a door. I froze, my phone slipping out of my hand. It hadn't come from the front door. It came from the window, the second-floor window. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. The backyard was empty. There were no decks, no ladders, no way for someone to knock on the window from outside. And yet I had heard it, clear as day. For a moment, I tried to convince myself I had imagined it. Maybe it had been a bird or a branch scraping against the glass. But the window was completely bare, no trees close enough to touch it, no overhanging branches. And then it came again. Tap, tap, tap. My skin prickled with cold fear. Slowly, I reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it toward the window. The beam bounced off the glass, revealing nothing but my own reflection and the dark stretch of forest behind me. I sat perfectly still, listening. The house was silent. Even the wind had died down, leaving only the heavy quiet of the night pressing in on me. Then I heard it, a faint, deliberate sound. The doorknob. It was turning. The door to the guest room, the one I had closed before getting into bed, was rattling softly, as if someone on the other side was testing the handle. Slowly, carefully, every muscle in my body tensed. I didn't dare move. My breath caught in my throat as the knob jiggled again, more forcefully this time. And then it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. I sat there in the dark, clutching my phone, waiting for something, anything, to happen. But the door stayed closed. The knob stayed still. I wanted to believe it was just my grandmother, maybe checking on me. But something deep in my gut told me that wasn't the case. My grandmother is old, and she never leaves her room in the middle of the night. She wouldn't have come all the way down the hall just to jiggle the handle without saying anything. I stayed frozen in bed for what felt like hours, barely breathing, my eyes glued to the door. Eventually, exhaustion must have caught up with me because I drifted off at some point. When I woke up, it was morning. Sunlight streamed through the window, making everything feel safe again. I let out a shaky breath, telling myself it had just been a bad dream, some trick of the mind brought on by being in an unfamiliar place. But when I got up and opened the door to the guest room, I noticed something strange. There were scratches on the outside of the door. Thin, jagged scratches, as if someone or something had dragged their nails across the wood. They weren't deep, but they were fresh. I ran my fingers over them, my heart racing. I wanted to ask my grandmother about it, but I was scared she wouldn't believe me, or worse, that she'd tell me she had heard the same thing before. I ended up staying one more night at her house, though I barely slept. I kept all the lights on, every door locked, and checked the windows at least 3 times. Nothing strange happened that night. But as I was leaving the next morning, my grandmother said something that still chills me to this day. She smiled as she handed me my bag and said, "I'm glad you had a quiet night. Sometimes people say they hear things around here." I forced a smile, trying to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. "What kind of things?" I asked, half joking, hoping she'd laugh it off. But she didn't. "Oh, just little knocks," she said casually, waving her hand. "Usually from the windows. Sometimes the doors. It's nothing to worry about." I didn't know what to say. I just nodded, gave her a hug, and got out of there as fast as I could. I haven't been back since. And honestly, I don't think I ever will. Okay, so my first night dancing? Absolute madness. I went in thinking, how hard can this be? And left wondering if my dignity was still intact. But somehow I survived, and honestly, it was the start of something I never thought I'd be able to do. At the time, I was 22, working part-time at a sandwich shop, barely scraping by. My shifts were unpredictable, the tips were laughable, and every time I checked my bank account, it felt like it was mocking me. I was exhausted, stressed, and sick of borrowing money from friends to make rent. One night, after a particularly depressing shift, I was scrolling through Instagram when I saw a girl I vaguely knew from high school post a picture of herself holding a fat stack of cash. She was in lingerie, smiling like she had no worries in the world, and the caption read, "One weekend of work, money with wings." That was the first time it hit me. There are people out here making rent in a single weekend while I'm burning myself out for minimum wage. I texted her, half as a joke, asking, "How?" She replied, "Come dance at my club. It's easier than it looks, and the money's good. You should try it." I sat with that idea for a few days, going back and forth in my head. Could I really do it? Was I brave enough? Desperate enough? Eventually, rent being due won the argument. I decided, screw it. What do I have to lose? Worst case, I suck, quit, and never think about it again. I called the club she worked at, Velvet Dreams, and the manager told me to come in that same night. "Just bring heels and a good attitude," he said. I laughed nervously, hung up, and immediately regretted everything. I didn't have any stripper clothes, so I grabbed a matching black bra and underwear set, threw on a skirt over it, and prayed it would be good enough. My shoes were a joke, some clunky platform heels I bought for a party, but I had no other options. I slathered on some eyeliner, tried to hype myself up in the mirror, and headed out. When I got to the club, the bouncer gave me a once-over and let me in without a word. The second I stepped inside, the bass from the speakers hit me like a truck. The place was dimly lit, with neon lights flashing across velvet couches and tables scattered around the room. I stood there, wide-eyed and overwhelmed, wondering what I'd gotten myself into. The manager, a guy named Rick, was sitting at the bar scrolling on his phone. He glanced at me and grinned. "You must be the new girl," he said. "You're on After Cherry." "Wait, what?" I thought I'd get some kind of tutorial, or at least a moment to breathe. Nope. Straight to the deep end. In the dressing room, I met a handful of dancers, all in various stages of getting ready. Some were touching up their makeup. Others were chatting like this was just another day at the office. One girl, Cherry, I assumed, was fixing her fishnet stockings and gave me a quick grin. First night? She asked like she already knew the answer. Yeah, I said, trying not to sound like I was about to pass out. She smirked. Just smile and act like you know what you're doing. The guys can't tell the difference. And with that, the DJ announced, "Let's give it up for Ivy." Yes, I panicked when Rick asked for my stage name earlier. Ivy just sounded kind of mysterious. Not my proudest moment. I stumbled out onto the stage, heart pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. The lights were brighter than I expected, and I couldn't see much of the audience beyond a few guys in the front row. The music started some slow, sultry beat, and I grabbed the pole, hoping it would keep me from collapsing. I tried to do a spin, and well, it didn't go exactly as planned. My hand slipped halfway through, and I ended up doing an awkward half-turn that nearly sent me flying off the stage. I heard one guy laugh, and I wanted to die right there. But I forced myself to keep going. I swayed my hips, flipped my hair, and gave the audience my best attempt at a seductive smile, though I'm pretty sure it came off more like deer in headlights. A few guys threw singles onto the stage, and at that point I didn't care if they were pity tips. Money was money, and I was just grateful they weren't booing me off stage. When the song ended, I scooped up the bills and bolted off the stage, my heart still racing. In the dressing room, Cherry was waiting for me, grinning like she'd just witnessed something hilarious. "Not bad, newbie," she said. "You didn't fall on your ass, so that's a win." I laughed, even though I was still shaking. Somehow, her casual vibe made me feel a little better. The rest of the night was a blur. I managed to offer a few lap dances, though they were awkward. My first customer was a quiet guy who looked like he'd wandered in by accident. He handed me $40 and said, I've never done this before." I wanted to say, "Same dude," but instead I smiled and told him to relax. The whole dance was painfully awkward, but at least he tipped me well. Then came the creep. There's always one. This guy smelled like cheap cologne and bad decisions, and he kept trying to grab my waist even after I told him not to. I ended the dance early, stood up, and walked away without a word. When I told Rick what happened, expecting to get in trouble for cutting the dance short, he just shrugged and said, "Good call. Some guys suck." By the end of the night, I was exhausted. My feet were killing me, my thighs ached, and I was covered in glitter that I knew I'd be finding for the next 3 weeks. But when I counted my tips, $180, I felt this weird little spark of pride. It wasn't much, but it was more than I'd ever made in a night before. And more than that, I survived. Walking out of the club that night, with cash stuffed in my bra and my shoes in hand, I felt different. Not invincible, but stronger. Like I'd done something that scared the hell out of me, and I made it through. I went back the next night, and the night after that. Each time it got a little easier. I learned how to move without tripping, how to flirt without feeling fake, and how to set boundaries with customers without feeling guilty. It wasn't always glamorous, but it gave me the financial breathing room I desperately needed, and a little bit of confidence too. After about 6 months, I decided to move on. But those nights in the club, they taught me more about myself than I ever expected. I learned how to stand my ground, how to hustle, and how to fake confidence until it felt real. So yeah, my first night was a mess, but it was also the beginning of something that made me stronger than I ever thought I could be. And for that, I'm grateful. We were together for almost 5 years. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. We had our inside jokes, favorite takeout places, and those quiet moments of comfort that only come after you've really built a life with someone. I thought we were in it for the long haul. I thought we were solid. But as I've learned, betrayal doesn't always explode. It creeps. Slowly, quietly, until it's too late, and all you're left with are pieces of the life you thought was real. It started small. It always does. He'd always been a little careless with his phone. He'd leave it anywhere, on the kitchen counter, the nightstand, sometimes even in the bathroom. I knew his passcode, not because I ever asked, but because we were comfortable. But one day his phone habits changed. It became glued to him, always in his pocket or face down on the table. I didn't want to read too much into it at first. Everyone's entitled to some privacy, I told myself. Except, it didn't feel like privacy. It felt like secrets. I noticed he'd started putting a little too much effort into his appearance, too. New clothes, cologne I didn't recognize. He'd always been more of a hoodie and sneakers kind of guy, but suddenly he was dressing better, working out more, and paying attention to how he looked, just not for me. When I teased him about it, "What's with the makeover? Got a hot date I should know about?" He just laughed and said, "I just want to feel better about myself." It sounded innocent enough, reasonable, even, but the way he said it made something stir in my gut. Then came the late nights. Out of nowhere, he started staying out later than usual. Work, drinks, meetings, catching up with friends. Every time I asked, he'd brush it off with the same tired excuses. "It's just work, babe. You're overthinking things. We'll hang out tomorrow." But tomorrow never came. One Friday night, after another long meeting, he came home at 2 a.m., smelling faintly of alcohol and perfume. A floral scent, sharp and unfamiliar. It hit me like a slap, but I stayed calm. "How was it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He smiled, kissed me on the forehead, and said, "Same old." But nothing about it felt like same old anymore. That night, I lay awake next to him, staring at the ceiling while he slept soundly beside me. The doubts were crawling under my skin like ants, and no matter how many times I tried to shake them off, they kept coming back. Then the accusations started, and that's when things began to unravel. "Why are you being so distant?" he asked one day, completely out of the blue. "Are you hiding something from me?" I stared at him, stunned. Me? Distant? I'd been bending over backward, trying to connect with him, trying to make things feel normal again. And now I was the one being accused? It hit me all at once. He's projecting. The guilt, the weird behavior, the sudden defensiveness. It wasn't about me at all. He was looking for cracks in me because he knew there were cracks in him. And yet, I still couldn't bring myself to confront it. I kept hoping I was wrong, that the man I loved wouldn't do this to me. Until the night I found out the truth. He told me he had to work late, another meeting that would run well into the night. "Don't wait up," he said, kissing me quickly before heading out the door. But this time, I couldn't sit still. The weight of all those late nights, all the excuses, all the little lies, it was too much. I knew if I didn't find out the truth that night, I never would. So I opened the location sharing app on my phone. We'd shared our locations for years. It was just a safety thing, a little way to look out for each other. I never thought I'd actually use it. But there it was. He wasn't at the office. He was at a hotel across town. My heart dropped into my stomach. I sat there, staring at the blinking dot on the map, hoping it was some kind of glitch. But it wasn't. He stayed there, at that same spot, for hours. I didn't cry. Not then. I just sat on the couch, numb, waiting for him to come home, knowing that the life I thought we had was gone. When he finally walked through the door at 3 a.m., reeking of alcohol and that same floral perfume, I was ready. He froze when he saw me sitting on the couch. "You're still up?" he asked, like everything was normal. "How was your meeting?" I asked, keeping my voice as calm as I could. He hesitated just for a second. "It was fine," he said, slipping off his shoes. "Same old." I nodded slowly, holding up my phone with the location app still open. "Do you want to try that again?" His face went pale. For a moment, he looked like he might try to lie, but then the fight left him. He slumped down on the edge of the couch, burying his face in his hands. "It's not what you think," he mumbled. I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "It's exactly what I think." He sat there, silent, while I waited for him to say something. Anything that could explain it all away. But there was nothing left to say. "How long?" I whispered, even though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. He sighed deeply. "4 months. 4 months. 4 months of lies. 4 months of sneaking around, pretending everything was fine, making me feel like I was the one losing my mind." "Why?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Why would you do this?" He shook his head. "I don't know. It just happened." I felt the floor drop out from under me. "Just happened?" I repeated, my voice hollow. "You don't just accidentally end up at a hotel with someone else." He didn't have a response. He just sat there, guilt and shame written all over his face. I stood up, feeling the weight of every lie settle on my chest. "I want you out," I whispered. We're done. He tried to apologize, but I didn't want to hear it. There was nothing left to save. The next morning, he packed his things and left. Just like that, the life we'd built together ended. Not with a fight, not with closure, but with silence. It's been months since that night, and I'd love to say I'm okay, but the truth is betrayal sticks with you. It makes you question everything. Every relationship, every instinct, every part of yourself that trusted someone else. But if I've learned anything, it's this: listen to your gut. If something feels off, don't ignore it. People will lie, they'll twist things, they'll make you feel like you're the crazy one. But your instincts, they don't lie. Next time, I won't wait for the lies to pile up. I won't sit on the couch at 3 a.m. waiting for someone to come home from a life they've kept hidden from me. Because love isn't supposed to leave you questioning your sanity. And if it does, it's not love, it's betrayal, dressed up as something familiar. Let me tell you how I almost died because of an automatic garage door. Yes, a freaking garage door, something I've used my entire life without incident, almost turned me into a cautionary tale. It was late one evening, and I had just finished hanging out at a friend's house. It had been one of those chill nights, pizza, a couple of beers, lots of bad jokes, and by the time I got home, I was feeling pretty relaxed. Too relaxed. I pulled into my driveway, hit the button to open the garage, and watched as the doors slowly rolled up. Easy, right? What could possibly go wrong? Except, as soon as I got out of the car, I realized I had forgotten to grab the mail. So I hit the button to close the garage door, figuring I'd grab the mail real quick and be back before the door even finished shutting. Here's where things went sideways. For reasons known only to the gods of chaos, the garage door stalled halfway down. It just stopped. Didn't close all the way. Didn't open back up. It just froze right there, hanging awkwardly a couple of feet above the ground. Okay, I thought. No big deal. I'll just hit the button again. I hit the button. Nothing. No movement. No sound. The garage door opener was dead. I hit the button a few more times, each press becoming more frantic. Still nothing. So now I'm standing there slightly annoyed, thinking, great. This is what I get for skipping maintenance. At this point, I figured I'd just manually close the door and call it a day. How hard could it be, right? I grabbed the edge of the garage door, gave it a little tug, and it didn't budge. Not an inch. Apparently, this door had the resistance of a freight train. But instead of stopping there, because of course, I wasn't going to let a garage door beat me, I decided to pull harder. Big mistake. I leaned down, grabbed the bottom of the door with both hands, and gave it everything I had. I was huffing and puffing, using my whole body to yank this thing down when suddenly the door sprang to life. Before I could react, the door jerked down with a violent lurch, and the entire thing came crashing toward the ground. Instinct kicked in, and I tried to jump backward, but instead of dodging out of the way like a normal person, I somehow tripped over my own feet. The door caught me mid-fall. One of the metal panels slammed into my shoulder, knocking me sideways, and I hit the ground hard. But the door? The door kept coming. Before I could even blink, the bottom edge of the garage door was pinning me to the floor like it was some kind of wrestler going for the win. Now, I don't know if you've ever been pinned under a garage door before, but let me tell you, it's a special kind of terrifying. I could feel the weight pressing down on my chest, making it harder to breathe with every second. My brain went into full panic mode, screaming, "You're gonna die under a garage door, you idiot! This is how it ends?" I tried to wiggle out, but the way I'd fallen made it impossible to get any leverage. The door had me trapped by my shoulder and arm, like some sort of mechanical bear trap. And here's the worst part. The sensor didn't go off. You know those safety sensors that are supposed to stop the door if it detects something in the way? Yeah, apparently, mine decided to take the night off. So there I was, lying half inside my garage, half outside in the driveway, pinned under a garage door, gasping for air, and realizing that nobody knew I was there. It was late. My neighbors were probably asleep. And my phone? Sitting conveniently out of reach in the car. I was stuck, and the longer I lay there, the more ridiculous the situation became in my head. I started picturing my obituary. Man crushed by own garage door. Neighbors reportedly heard no screams, only sad grunting. It wasn't a good look. After a minute of sheer panic, I managed to twist my body, just enough to slide my leg under the door and kick it upward. It took every bit of strength I had, but the door creaked and shifted just enough for me to pull my arm free. I rolled out of the way as fast as I could, landing flat on my back, panting like I just run a marathon. I lay there for a good 5 minutes, just staring at the ceiling of my garage, wondering how my life had gotten to this point. My shoulder was throbbing, my back felt like I'd been hit by a truck, and I was pretty sure I was going to have some impressive bruises the next day. But I was alive. Barely. After a few minutes, I got to my feet, wincing in pain, and glared at the garage door like it had personally offended me. I hit the button one more time, just for the hell of it, and wouldn't you know it? The door closed perfectly. No stalling, no weird noises, just smooth as butter. It was like the damn thing knew it had won the battle and decided to leave me alone. I limped inside, grabbed some ice from my shoulder, and spent the rest of the night on the couch, nursing both my injuries and my pride. The next morning, I called a repair guy to check the door. When I told him what had happened, he just laughed and said, "Yeah, those sensors don't always work." Great. Good to know. So here's the moral of the story. Don't mess with garage doors. They might look like simple machines, but they're out for blood. If your door ever stalls, just walk away. Don't try to be a hero. And whatever you do, keep your phone within arm's reach, because if you end up pinned under a door, you're going to need it. This happened last summer, and I tried to forget about it. But every time I'm alone at night, it creeps back into my mind. No matter how many times I tell myself it wasn't real, I know what I saw, and worse, I know it saw me too. I was staying at a friend's cabin for the weekend, out in the middle of nowhere. It was supposed to be a relaxing getaway. No cell service, no Wi-Fi, just a couple of days off the grid. The cabin was small but cozy, tucked deep into the woods, miles from the nearest town. The first night was uneventful. Just me, a book, and the sounds of crickets outside the window. I fell asleep easily, enjoying the quiet. But that peace didn't last long. At around 2 a.m., I woke up suddenly. At first, I wasn't sure why. I hadn't heard anything. The room was dark, with only a faint sliver of moonlight filtering through the curtains. I lay there for a moment, trying to figure out what had woken me up. And then I heard it, a knock. It was soft, deliberate 3 slow taps on the window. Now keep in mind, this cabin is deep in the woods. There's no one else around for miles. No reason for anyone to be outside, especially in the middle of the night. My stomach twisted with fear as I sat up in bed, heart pounding in my chest. I tried to convince myself it was just a branch hitting the glass. But the knocks came again, tap, tap, tap. This time slower. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and turned on the flashlight, pointing it toward the window. For a moment, I hesitated. I knew I shouldn't look. Something in my gut told me that whatever was out there, I didn't want to see it. But I did it anyway. I pulled the curtain aside, shining the light outside. There was a face staring right back at me. It was pressed against the glass, so close that I could see the moisture from its breath fogging up the window. But it was a human, not really. Its eyes were too large, too dark, and there was something off about the way its mouth stretched into a wide, toothy grin. I froze. For a moment, we just stared at each other, me on one side of the glass and on the other. And then, slowly, it raised a hand and tapped on the window again. Top, top, top. The sound sent a jolt of fear through my entire body. My hands shook, and I dropped the phone, plunging the room into darkness. In the pitch black, I heard the thing drag its nails down the glass, a slow, deliberate scrape that made my skin crawl. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. I just sat there, frozen in fear. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the noise stopped. I waited, holding my breath, listening for any sign that it was still there. But everything was silent. No knocks, no scraping, just the quiet hum of the forest outside. After what felt like an eternity, I reached down, fumbling for my phone. I turned the flashlight back on, my heart pounding so loudly I thought it might burst out of my chest. Slowly, I shined the light toward the window again. It was gone. I tried to convince myself it had just been a trick of the light, maybe a shadow or a dream. But as I leaned closer to the window, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A handprint, pressed into the glass from the outside. Long fingers, too thin, too sharp, smeared slightly as if it had dragged them across the surface. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat on the edge of the bed, flashlight clutched in my hand, waiting for it to come back. But it never did. The next morning, I packed my things and left the cabin without looking back. I told my friend something had come up, and I couldn't stay the weekend. I didn't tell him the real reason. I don't think he would have believed me. But even now, every time I hear a tap on the window, I freeze. Because I know it's still out there, somewhere waiting. This happened just last month, and I've been trying to forget it ever since. I still feel weird talking about it, because every time I go over the details in my head, it feels like I'm missing something, like whatever happened isn't done with me yet. I live in an apartment on the second floor of a pretty normal building. It's not the nicest place, but it's quiet and safe enough. My only complaint is the hallway. It's long, narrow, and dimly lit by these flickering yellow lights. Something about it always feels off. During the day, it's just annoying, but at night, walking down that hallway feels like stepping into a bad dream. It was a Thursday night, around 11 p.m. I'd had a long day at work, so I was exhausted by the time I got home. I kicked off my shoes, threw my keys on the counter, and settled in to watch TV on the couch. The plan was to stay up for an hour or two, unwind with some Netflix, and crash. Around midnight, I got up to grab a snack from the kitchen. I was halfway there when I heard something, a knock on my front door. 3 slow measured knocks. Tap, tap, tap. I stopped in my tracks, confused. No one ever came by this late, especially not unannounced. I glanced at my phone to see if maybe I'd missed a text from a neighbor or the building manager, but there was nothing. Another knock. This time, it was just one, soft and deliberate. My stomach twisted. I walked to the door, keeping my steps as quiet as possible. When I reached it, I leaned in and peered through the peephole. The hallway outside was empty. I frowned, feeling the first cold prickle of unease settle over me. Maybe someone had knocked on the wrong door by accident. It had happened before. People would get confused late at night, especially if they'd been drinking. I shrugged it off and turned away, figuring that was the end of it. Then I heard it again. Knock. This time, it wasn't from the front door. It came from the other side of the apartment, from the balcony window. My heart nearly stopped. The balcony is on the second floor. There's no stairway, no fire escape, just a drop straight to the pavement below. There was no way anyone could be out there. And yet, someone had knocked. I stood frozen, trying to convince myself I was just hearing things. But I couldn't ignore the chill running down my spine. Slowly, I walked to the living room and stared at the curtains that covered the sliding glass door leading to the balcony. The curtain was drawn, but I swear I could feel something, someone on the other side. For a moment, I thought about pulling the curtain open, just to prove to myself there was nothing there. But something deep inside me, a voice, a gut instinct, screamed, "Don't." I backed away slowly, my pulse pounding in my ears. I grabbed my phone and texted the building manager. "Hey, is there any maintenance going on tonight? Someone keeps knocking." A few minutes passed. No reply. I kept staring at the curtain, willing myself to calm down, telling myself it was just the wind or a weird creak from the building. But then, tap, tap, tap. My breath caught in my throat. The knock was louder this time, more insistent. I clenched my phone tighter, heart racing, unsure of what to do. Every instinct, I had screamed not to open the curtain. I knew that whatever was out there, I didn't want to see it. And then my phone buzzed. A message from the building manager. "There's no one from maintenance working tonight. Don't open the door. Lock everything. Call me if it happens again." My blood ran cold. I checked the lock on the balcony door 3 times, making sure it was secure. I backed away from the window, every light in the apartment blazing, trying to shake the feeling that something was watching me from the other side of the glass. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch, clutching my phone, every muscle in my body tense, listening for any other sounds. But after that last knock, there was nothing. Just the eerie silence of the night pressing in from every direction. Morning came slowly. When the sun finally rose, I forced myself to walk over to the balcony door and pull the curtain open. The balcony was empty. No footprints, no signs that anyone had been there. But on the outside of the glass, at eye level, was a single handprint. It wasn't smudged like a normal handprint. It was perfect. Every finger, every line of the palm etched clearly against the glass. like whoever left it had pressed their hand flat against the window for a long time. And the hand was too big, way too big. I stared at it, heart hammering in my chest, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Eventually, I grabbed some paper towels and wiped it away, pretending that getting rid of it would make me feel better. It didn't. I haven't heard the knocking since, but every night I triple-check the locks. And sometimes, when I walk into the living room after dark, I catch myself glancing at the balcony, half expecting to see someone standing there. Just waiting. This happened just last week. It's still fresh, too fresh. I keep telling myself it was all in my head, that it didn't happen the way I remember, but that gnawing feeling won't leave me alone. It started with a walk. It was around midnight, and I'd had one of those restless nights where you feel too wired to sit still. My apartment felt too small, too quiet, so I decided to go for a walk around the neighborhood to clear my head. I live in a pretty quiet part of town, mostly old houses and empty streets after dark. I'd done the walk 100 times before without anything strange ever happening. But that night, something felt off the second I stepped outside. The air was thick, like the calm before a storm, but there wasn't a cloud in the sky. The streetlights flickered, casting jittery shadows that seemed to shift just a little too quickly. The road stretched out ahead of me, empty, with no cars, no people. Just me, the cold night, and the sound of my shoes on the pavement. About 15 minutes in, I noticed something strange. There was someone walking about a block ahead of me. At first, I didn't think much of it, just someone else out for a late-night stroll. But as I got closer, I noticed they were walking strangely. Their movements were slow, too deliberate, like they weren't used to walking or had forgotten how it was supposed to feel. They were wearing dark clothes, something long, like a coat that dragged at the edges, and a wide-brimmed hat that cast their face in deep shadow. The way they moved made my skin crawl, but I told myself to relax. It was probably just some eccentric neighbor. People are weird. I crossed the street, hoping to avoid them, but the second I did, they stopped, dead still, like they'd noticed me, even though I was too far away to see their face. They turned their head, slowly, deliberately, and faced me. Even from that distance, I could feel the weight of their attention, like cold fingers trailing down my spine. Then they smiled. I don't know how I knew. They were too far for me to see, but I felt it. That smile. Wide, patient, and impossibly knowing. And then they started walking toward me. Norus. Just one slow step after another. Each step perfectly deliberate, like they had all the time in the world. I turned and walked faster, my pulse hammering in my ears. I told myself not to run. Don't run. Don't give them a reason to follow. But no matter how fast I walked, I could feel them getting closer. The sound of their shoes on the pavement was soft at first, almost rhythmic. But with every step I took, their steps matched mine. Faster, louder. By the time I hit the corner, I was sprinting. I didn't care anymore. I ran as fast as I could, my breath coming in ragged gasps, shoes slamming against the concrete. But no matter how fast I ran, I could still hear their steps. And they were getting closer. I glanced back, just for a second. They were right behind me. I didn't see their face, just the outline of that wide-brimmed hat, their coat flaring behind them as they closed the distance between us. They weren't running. They were walking. But somehow, they were keeping up. I turned onto my street, sprinting toward my apartment, my heart about to explode from fear and exhaustion. I fumbled for my keys as I reached the door, nearly dropping them as the footsteps closed in behind me. I could feel them, right there, just inches away. The door swung open, and I threw myself inside, slamming it shut behind me. I locked the deadbolt, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the knob. And then everything went silent. I pressed my ear to the door, listening. The only sound was my own ragged breathing. No footsteps, no rustling close, nothing. I leaned back against the wall, trying to calm down. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe it was just a bad night. I stood there for a long time, waiting until I was sure, absolutely sure, that I was alone. But just as I started to relax, there it was. A knock. 3 soft, deliberate knocks. My blood ran cold. I stared at the door, heart pounding, praying it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Then it came again. Knock, knock, knock. Slow, patient, like whoever was out there knew I wouldn't be able to resist. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. I just stood there, frozen, waiting for the knocking to stop. But it didn't. And then I heard a voice. "I know you're home." It wasn't loud, just a whisper, soft and calm, spoken through the door like a promise. "Let me in." I backed away from the door, my pulse pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. I grabbed my phone, fumbling with the screen, and dialed 911. The call connected, but the line was filled with nothing but static. And then the voice came again, this time through the phone. "It's too late." The lights flickered. The air grew cold. I dropped the phone, heart slamming against my ribs, and ran to the back of the apartment. I locked myself in the bathroom, flipped the light on, and sat there back pressed against the door, trying not to scream. I don't know how long I sat there. Maybe hours. Maybe longer. But when I finally worked up the courage to open the door, the apartment was empty. The front door was still locked. The lights were on. Everything looked normal, except for one small thing. There was something sitting on my kitchen counter. A wide-brimmed hat. I haven't been able to sleep since. And every now and then, late at night, I hear it again. Knock, knock, knock. I haven't opened the door, and I don't think I ever will. But I know one thing for sure. One night, I won't have a choice. Alright, so my first night dancing? A complete disaster. Like, sitcom level awkward with a side of what the hell am I doing? But somehow, I survived, and it ended up being one of the wildest and weirdest nights of my life. At the time, I was 23, drowning in credit card debt, with rent due and no backup plan. I was working a crappy retail job where I spent most of my shifts folding the same 5 t-shirts over and over, and it felt like I was getting nowhere. One of my coworkers casually mentioned that she had been dancing at a club on the weekends and was making way more than we ever would folding clothes. "You should try it," she said. "It's scary at first, but it's not that bad. And the money is so worth it." At first, I laughed it off, but a few days later, when I realized my phone bill was overdue and I couldn't even afford groceries, I started thinking, why not? If she could do it, maybe I could too. I spent the whole day hyping myself up, Googling what to expect your first night stripping, and watching YouTube tutorials on basic pole tricks. Spoiler, those tutorials did not help. At all. But I was desperate. I figured worst case, I'd suck, quit after one night, and at least I'd have tried. That same day, I called a club a few miles away, called the Neon Room. The manager, some guy named Tommy, told me I could come in that night. "No experience? Don't worry," he said. "Just have fun, and the rest will come." Easy for him to say. I didn't own any real stripper shoes or outfits, so I threw on a lace bodysuit, some fishnet tights, and a pair of cheap black heels that were more appropriate for a wedding than a pole. I stared at myself in the mirror and told myself, "You can do this. You just need to survive a few hours." When I got to the club, the place was exactly what you'd expect. A lot of flashing lights, velvet curtains, and a smell that was equal parts perfume, cigarettes, and spilled beer. The bouncer gave me a quick nod as I walked in, and just like that, there was no turning back. Tommy, the manager, greeted me with a quick smile and handed me a clipboard with a waiver and house rules. "Read this later," he said, waving toward the bar. "You're on in 20. My stomach dropped. 20 minutes? I thought I'd at least get a little time to ease into it, maybe watch a few of the other girls first. Nope. Straight into the fire. In the dressing room, I met a few of the other dancers. Most of them were too busy getting ready to notice me, but one girl named Crystal saw me fumbling with my fishnets and laughed. "First night?" she asked, already knowing the answer. I nodded, trying to adjust my top for the 10th time. "Don't worry," she said, sliding in her sky-high heels like she'd been born in them. "You'll suck at first, but we all do. Just smile, act confident, and don't trip." Easier said than done. Before I knew it, the DJ called my name. "All right, give it up for Luna." Yes, I panicked and picked Luna because it sounded vaguely sexy and mysterious. I immediately regretted it. I stumbled out onto the stage, squinting against the bright lights. The music started, something slow with a heavy beat, and I grabbed the pole like it was the only thing keeping me upright. I tried to do a spin, but my hand slipped, and I ended up doing this awkward little shuffle that definitely didn't look intentional. A couple of guys in the front row smirked, and I could feel my face heat up, but I kept going. I swayed my hips, flipped my hair, and smiled like I wasn't internally screaming. And somehow, a few singles landed at my feet. Not a lot, but hey, it was something. When the song ended, I scooped up the cash and made a beeline for the dressing room, trying not to trip on my way out. Back in the dressing room, Crystal was waiting for me, grinning like she'd just seen the funniest thing all night. "Not bad, newbie," she teased, handing me a water bottle. "You stayed on your feet. That's better than most girls on their first night." I laughed, even though my hands were still shaking. At least I'd survived my first stage set without completely embarrassing myself. Or so I thought. The rest of the night was chaotic. I tried to offer lap dances, but it was awkward as hell. My first customer was this shy guy who kept saying, "Sorry, I've never done this before," like he was afraid I'd kick him out for not knowing the rules. I wanted to tell him, "Dude, same," but instead, I just smiled and swayed awkwardly while he stared at the floor. Then came the creep. Every club has one. This guy smelled like vodka and bad decisions, and he kept trying to grab my thighs, even after I moved his hands away 3 times. I finally stood up and told him the dance was over. He rolled his eyes and muttered, "You're no fun," but at that point I didn't care. I just wanted to get away from him. When I told Tommy about it, expecting to get in trouble for ending the dance early, he just shrugged and said, "Good. Don't let them walk all over you." That was probably the only reassuring thing anyone said to me all night. By the time my shift ended, I was physically and emotionally drained. My feet were killing me. My thighs ached from gripping the pole, and I had glitter in places I didn't even know glitter could reach. But when I counted my tips, $1.80, I felt a strange little flicker of pride. It wasn't a fortune, but it was more than I'd ever made in a night before. Walking out of the club, shoes in hand, and cash stuffed in my bra, I felt different. Not confident exactly, but like I'd proven something to myself. I'd stepped way outside my comfort zone and lived to tell the tale. I went back the next night, and the night after that. It got easier. I learned how to move without tripping, how to talk to customers without cringing, and how to spot the guys who were worth my time from a mile away. I wasn't the best dancer, but I got better at faking confidence until it felt real. After a few months, I decided to move on, but those nights at the club, they taught me more about myself than I ever expected. I learned how to set boundaries, how to stand up for myself, and how to keep going even when everything felt overwhelming. So yeah, my first night was an absolute mess. But it was also the beginning of something that made me stronger than I ever thought I could be. And honestly, I wouldn't trade that experience for anything. This happened 3 nights ago, and I haven't been able to sleep since. I've tried everything, lights on, music playing, TV in the background, but nothing helps. Every time I close my eyes, I feel it creeping back in, like it's waiting. It started around midnight. I just finished working late and was sitting on my couch, scrolling through my phone, trying to wind down. The apartment was quiet, too quiet, and I remember feeling this weird sense of dread, like something was wrong, even though I couldn't put my finger on it. I brushed it off, blaming it on exhaustion. Then the power went out. Everything shut off at once, lights, TV, the hum of the fridge. The entire apartment plunged into pitch black silence. I sat there for a moment, waiting for it to flicker back on, but it didn't. That's when I heard it. A soft, deliberate knock. Knock, knock, knock. It came from the front door. My stomach dropped. I live on the 3rd floor of a building with a locked main entrance. Nobody gets in unless they live here, and definitely not at midnight. I told myself it was probably a neighbor needing help. Maybe they locked themselves out. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. I stood up slowly, heart pounding, and made my way to the door. I pressed my eye to the peephole, squinting into the distorted fisheye view of the hallway. There was no one there. The hallway was empty, just dim emergency lighting casting strange shadows across the walls. I waited, watching the empty space through the peephole, hoping it had been nothing more than my imagination. And then it came again. Knock, knock, knock. I jumped back, heart slamming against my ribs. But when I looked through the peephole again, the hallway was still empty. I backed away from the door, every hair on my body standing on end. I didn't know what to do. I knew I hadn't imagined the sound, but there was no one there. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. There was a shape standing just beyond the edge of the peephole's view. It was close, too close, pressed against the wall just out of sight. I could see a sliver of it, the dark curve of a shoulder, maybe a hint of a hand resting lightly against the doorframe. And then it leaned closer. I couldn't see its face, just a faint outline of something shifting in the shadows, like it was listening, waiting for me to make the first move. It knocked again. Knock, knock, knock. But this time, it wasn't coming from the front door. It was coming from inside the apartment. My breath caught in my throat, and I spun around, phone clutched in my hand, flashlight shaking as I scanned the darkened room. Nothing. Just my apartment, exactly as it should be. And then the knock came again. Knock, knock, knock. This time, it was coming from the closet. I froze. I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't move. I just stood there, staring at the closed closet door, heart pounding so loud it felt like the sound was coming from inside my skull. The doorknob rattled, just slightly, like someone inside was testing it, seeing if it would open. I backed away, step by slow step, until I was pressed against the far wall. I kept my flashlight trained on the closet, my hand shaking so badly the beam jittered. Then the door began to open. It didn't swing wide, just a crack, enough for a sliver of darkness to spill out into the room. I couldn't see inside, couldn't see what was waiting in there, but I could feel it, and then it whispered, "I found you." I ran. I didn't even grab my shoes. I just bolted out of the apartment, down 3 flights of stairs and into the street. I didn't stop running until I was halfway across town, heart pounding, lungs burning, the cold night air stinging my skin. I stayed at a friend's place that night. I told them I'd had a bad dream, that I'd freaked myself out over nothing. But I knew the truth. I went back the next day, just after sunrise. The apartment felt normal. No strange shadows, no strange knocks. But when I walked over to the closet, my blood ran cold. The door was wide open, and on the inside of the door, scratched deep into the wood, were 3 words. "I found you." I haven't gone back since. But last night, while I was lying in bed at my friend's place, I heard it again. Knock, knock, knock. It's only a matter of time. And next time, I don't think I'll get away. For the past few months, I've been pretending that I'm okay, that I'm happy, functional, and doing just fine. But the truth is, I'm not. I'm not okay at all. Every day, I wake up and put on the same mask, the one that says I'm normal, productive, someone who has their life together. I smile when I'm supposed to, laugh at the right moments, show up to work, respond to texts, and post pictures that make it look like I'm living a good, happy life. But underneath all of that, I feel like I'm falling apart. And no one knows. It's not that I want to lie. I've just gotten really good at it. At some point, the lies became easier than the truth. When someone asks how I'm doing, it's easier to say, "Good, just tired," than to admit that I've been feeling empty inside for months. It's not like anything huge or terrible happened to trigger this. It was more like a slow unraveling. Little things piling up, work stress, relationship problems, nights spent lying awake with my mind racing. One day, I realized I hadn't felt genuinely happy in a long time. And instead of dealing with it, I just ignored it. I started telling myself, I'll feel better tomorrow. But tomorrow came, and nothing changed. So I said next week, next month. But the empty feeling stayed. And now, it feels like I've drifted too far out to find my way back. The hardest part is that, on paper, my life looks fine. I have a decent job, a partner who loves me, friends who check in, and a family that cares. From the outside, there's no reason for me to feel this way. And that's what makes it so much harder to talk about. How do you tell the people in your life that you feel like you're drowning when there's no obvious reason for it? So instead of telling the truth, I fake it. I laugh when people make jokes, even though I don't feel anything. I say things like, I just need a good night's sleep, or things have been a little hectic, but I'm fine. And they believe me. Why wouldn't they? I've always been the strong one, the one who keeps it together, the one who listens when other people need to vent. I've built my entire identity around being dependable. If I admit I'm struggling now, I don't know who I am without that. Some nights, I sit in the shower until the water runs cold, wishing I could just disappear for a little while. Not forever, just long enough to catch my breath, long enough to stop pretending. But life doesn't work like that. Does it? So I get out of the shower, dry off, and go back to being me. The lies have become so ingrained that sometimes I catch myself believing them too. I'll tell someone I'm fine, and for a moment I think maybe I am, but then I get home, and the mask slips off, and I remember how heavy everything feels. How hard it is to keep going, day after day, pretending to be someone I'm not. The worst part is, the people in my life care about me. I know they do. I know that if I told my partner or my friends the truth, they'd listen. They try to help. But that's the thing. I don't even know what kind of help I need. What am I supposed to say? I feel empty, and I don't know why. That feels so vague, so pointless. And what if I tell them, and it changes the way they see me? What if they start treating me like I'm fragile? Or worse, like I'm a burden? So I stay quiet. I show up to work, make plans with friends, celebrate birthdays, and go through the motions like everything's fine. I say yes when people ask if I want to hang out, even though all I want to do is crawl into bed and sleep for days. And every time I fake a smile, every time I lie about how I'm doing, the weight gets a little heavier. I keep telling myself that I just need to hold on a little longer, that eventually things will get better. That one morning, I'll wake up and the fog will lift, and I'll feel like myself again. But what if that never happens? What if this is just who I am now? A person who pretends to be okay because it's easier than admitting they're not. I know I should reach out to someone, tell them what's really going on, but the words always get stuck in my throat. And every time someone asks, "Are you okay?" I smile and say, "Yeah, just tired." And they believe me. And I hate that they believe me. Because the truth is, I'm not just tired. I'm exhausted. Exhausted from pretending, from carrying this secret, from trying to convince everyone, including myself, that I'm fine. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up, but I also don't know how to ask for help. So for now, I'll keep doing what I've been doing. I'll keep lying, keep smiling, keep pretending everything is fine. And maybe if I fake it long enough, one day it will be. This happened just a few nights ago, and I can't stop thinking about it. I try to tell myself it wasn't real, that maybe I was half asleep or dreaming. But I know it wasn't. I know what I saw and what I heard. It was around 3 a.m. when I woke up. I wasn't sure what had stirred me at first. The room was quiet, just the hum of my fan and the soft ticking of the wall clock. I lay there for a moment, blinking in the darkness, wondering why I felt so uneasy. And then I heard it. Someone was whispering. At first, I thought maybe it was coming from outside, some drunk neighbor, maybe, or a couple talking on the street. But the more I listened, the more I realized it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside the room. The voice was low, raspy, and impossible to make out, like someone was muttering under their breath. My heart started racing as I scanned the room, eyes straining in the dark. Nothing seemed out of place. My bedroom door was shut, the closet door was closed, and the window was locked. I tried to convince myself it was just the fan making weird noises, or maybe the pipes in the walls. But the whispering didn't stop. If anything, it was getting closer. I sat up, my breath coming in shallow gasps, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. And then, in the middle of the whispers, I heard something clear, my name. "Come here," it whispered. "Come closer." I felt my blood turn cold. I didn't move, didn't even breathe. I just sat there, clutching the blanket, hoping that whatever it was would leave. But the whispering continued, relentless and low, circling the room like it was looking for me. Then I saw it, a shadow. It was standing in the corner of the room, just barely visible in the dark. A tall, thin figure with long arms that dangled at its sides. I couldn't see its face, but I knew it was looking at me, watching. And then it moved. It didn't walk. It glided forward, as if the darkness itself carried it across the room. It stopped just at the edge of my bed, towering over me. My heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying that it was a dream, that if I didn't look, it would go away. But the voice whispered again, so close now, I could feel the breath on my ear. "I've been waiting for you." I couldn't take it anymore. I threw the blanket off, grabbed my phone, and switched on the flashlight. The room flooded with light, and it was gone. Just like that. I sat there for what felt like hours, trying to calm my breathing, scanning the room with my flashlight. Everything looked normal, but I knew better. I knew it had been real. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. In the morning, I told myself it was just a dream, maybe sleep paralysis, and tried to go about my day like nothing had happened. But something felt wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, even in broad daylight. And then last night, just as I was about to drift off to sleep, I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. 3 soft knocks, this time coming from inside the closet. I've been lying to everyone about why I stopped talking to my mom. They think it's just distance or that we drifted apart. But the truth is, I cut her out of my life on purpose. And the reason why? It's because I found out something that shattered everything I thought I knew about her. It was a Facebook post of all things, a random post shared by a mutual friend. One of those small world connections that feels weird but harmless. It was a photo of my mom, standing arm in arm with some man I'd never seen before. At first, I thought maybe it was just a co-worker or some old friend I didn't know. But the caption? It was a love quote. Something cheesy like, "Grateful for this man every day. He makes life worth living." I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling like the ground had just been pulled out from under me. My parents had been married for over 30 years, happily, as far as I knew. My dad adored my mom, and I thought they were solid, the kind of couple who would grow old together. And now, out of nowhere, here she was with some random guy, acting like he was the love of her life. I didn't even know how to process it. Part of me thought there had to be some kind of mistake. Maybe it was just a weird joke, or maybe someone hacked her account. But when I clicked on the man's profile, it all came crashing down. They'd been together for years. There were photos going back almost a decade, trips, holidays, even romantic captions that overlapped with the time when my parents were still married. I kept scrolling, going deeper and deeper, until I found a photo from 5 years ago. The two of them on a tropical vacation, smiling, arms wrapped around each other. The timestamp on that photo made me sick. My parents were still married back then. I spent the whole night going down this rabbit hole, piecing together a secret life I never knew my mom had. And the worst part, my dad had no idea. He still talked about her sometimes, how they tried their best, how divorce was hard, but he wished her well. He never knew that while he was trying to hold their marriage together, she was off building a new life with someone else. I should have confronted her right away. I should have picked up the phone and asked her what the hell was going on. But instead, I froze. I couldn't call her, not with the way my hands were shaking, not with the rage boiling under my skin. So I just stopped talking to her. At first, she reached out, texts, voicemails, even emails, asking why I was being distant. I made up excuses, said I was busy with work, that I had a lot going on, that I needed space. She believed me at first, but as the weeks went by, her messages became shorter, more confused. She started calling less and texting less, until eventually, she stopped altogether. And I let her go. My brother has no idea. None of my friends do either. They all think it's just a typical case of a grown kid becoming distant from their parent. They tell me things like, you should really call your mom. She misses you. And I just smile, nod, and say, yeah, I'll reach out soon. But I know I won't. The thing is, I don't even know what I want from her anymore. An apology? An explanation? What good would that do? It wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't undo the years she spent lying to us, building a new life while pretending to care about the one she had with us. I know people aren't perfect. I know marriages fall apart, and people make mistakes. But it wasn't just the affair, it was the deception. The fact that she let us believe she was someone she wasn't for years. She made us feel guilty for not calling her enough, for not visiting more often, all while she was living this double life. I've thought about telling my dad the truth. Every time we have lunch together or talk on the phone, I feel the words bubbling up in my throat, ready to spill out. But how do you say, hey, remember the woman you spent 30 years loving? She cheated on you the whole time? He still talks about her with kindness in his voice, like she's just someone who slipped through his fingers. Telling him the truth would destroy him, and I can't do that to him. So, I carry this secret alone. Every once in a while, my mom will send me a text. Something light like thinking of you. Hope you're doing well. I never respond. I just delete the messages and pretend they never happened. But the guilt? It doesn't go away. There's this constant, nagging voice in the back of my head saying, she's still your mom. That no matter what she did, No matter how badly she messed up, she's the person who raised me. She taught me how to ride a bike, stayed up with me when I had fevers, cried when I graduated. And now, I'm pretending like she's dead because I can't figure out how to forgive her. Some days, I wonder if I'm being too harsh. If I'll regret this years from now, when she's gone and I can't take any of it back. But other days, the anger feels so overwhelming that I can't imagine ever talking to her again. I don't know how this ends. Maybe one day, I'll wake up and find the strength to call her, to sit down and have the conversation I've been avoiding. Or maybe I won't. Maybe I'll carry this resentment with me forever, and it'll just become one more thing I bury deep inside. For now, all I know is that I can't pretend anymore. Not with her, not with my brother, not with myself. So I keep the secret. I keep lying when people ask about her, saying everything's fine, saying I'll call her soon. And every time I tell that lie, the weight of it settles a little deeper into my chest. But the truth? I don't know if I'll ever be ready to forgive her. And I don't know if she even deserves it. So, this is the story of how I almost died because of a balloon. Yes, a stupid, innocent-looking party balloon. It all started at my nephew's birthday party. He had just turned 5, and the whole house was packed with kids running around, adults pretending they were fine with the chaos, and enough sugar to send a rhino into orbit. There were balloons everywhere, floating off chairs, tied to the backs of furniture, and being batted around like volleyballs. Now, I've never been a huge fan of balloons. Not because they scare me, but because they're annoying. You can't take them seriously. They're either popping in your face, bouncing around unpredictably, or you're stuck babysitting one so some kid doesn't lose their mind when it floats away. But that day I figured, whatever. It's a party. I'll roll with it. Then, at some point in the middle of the madness, I noticed one of the balloons drifting lazily toward the ceiling fan. It was one of those big helium balloons with a shiny metallic surface and some cheesy cartoon printed on it. The fan was spinning lazily, like it didn't have a care in the world. But the balloon was closing in like it had a mission to self-destruct. Without thinking, I decided I'd be the hero. I figured I could catch the balloon before it got tangled in the fan and caused a meltdown. I didn't want to deal with a crying kid, or worse, the awkward moment where the fan eats the balloon and explodes in a shower of sparks. So, I jumped up, swiping at the string of the balloon. That's when everything started going wrong. First, the balloon bobbed out of reach, like it was taunting me. I tried again, this time standing on my tiptoes and reaching as high as I could. And right when I managed to grab the string, the fan blades whacked it, and the balloon whipped around the fan, wrapping the string around my wrist like a lasso. So now I'm standing in the middle of a birthday party, tangled in a balloon string, looking like a complete idiot. But instead of calmly unwrapping myself, I made the brilliant decision to yank the balloon free. Big, freaking mistake. The sudden pull caused the fan to wobble violently. One of the blades jerked downward and smacked me on the side of the head with a loud thunk. It wasn't a hard hit, but it was enough to knock me off balance. And since I'd been standing on my tiptoes, well, you guessed it, gravity came for me. I stumbled backward, tripped over the dog's water bowl, and hit the ground hard. My butt hit first, but my head followed immediately, slamming into the side of the coffee table with a crack that echoed through the living room. For a second, everything went blurry. I just lay there on the floor, tangled in balloon string, covered in water, and surrounded by startled 5-year-olds. My head was spinning and I thought, this is it. This is how I go. Death by helium balloon. And the worst part? That stupid balloon, because it had no concept of shame, floated back up to the ceiling like nothing had happened. Meanwhile, the kids gathered around me, giggling because to them, I looked like a hilarious human pretzel. One of them even poked me and said, "Are you dead?" I couldn't answer because I was too busy trying to figure out if I'd given myself a concussion. Eventually, my sister came over, trying not to laugh as she asked, "What the hell just happened?" What was I supposed to say? The balloon one? After sitting there in stunned silence for a minute, I managed to untangle the string from my wrist, stand up, still dripping from the dog bowl, and limp over to the couch. My head was pounding, my butt was sore, and I had a lump forming on the side of my skull, all over a balloon. The rest of the party went on without a hitch, But I sat there nursing my dignity and avoiding all eye contact with that floating devil. Here's the kicker. Later that night, I Googled injuries caused by balloons just to see if I was the only idiot to ever get taken down by one. Turns out, I'm not. People get hurt all the time trying to rescue balloons from ceiling fans, light fixtures, and fences. Some have even ended up in the hospital. So, here's the moral of the story. Let the balloon go. Seriously, it's not worth it. No kid will remember the balloon, but you'll definitely remember the humiliation of being defeated by one. These days, every time I see a helium balloon, I take a deep breath, give it a little nod, and walk the other way. Okay, so, my first night dancing? Absolute chaos from start to finish. I was terrified, out of my depth, and convinced I was going to humiliate myself so badly that they'd never let me back. But, spoiler, I survived. And even though it wasn't perfect or remotely graceful, I ended the night with cash in my bra and a weird little sense of accomplishment. So, here's how it all went down. I was 24, working at a diner where every shift felt like being slowly crushed by the weight of customer complaints and coffee refills. My rent was late again, and my car was on its last leg. I knew I needed to make a change, but I felt trapped. Then one night, my friend Lexi, who'd been dancing for a couple of years, casually suggested I try it. "You'd be good at it," she said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "You've got the look, and it's better than waiting tables for tips from old guys who call you sweetheart." At first, I laughed. Me? A stripper? I could barely dance at parties without feeling self-conscious. But Lexi insisted, telling me the money was good, the shifts were flexible, and it wasn't as scary as it sounded. "Trust me," she said. "The first night's weird, but you get over it." So, with rent breathing down my neck and zero better ideas, I decided to give it a shot. I called the club she recommended, the Velvet Lounge, and the manager, a woman named Tasha, told me to come in that same night. "Bring heels and a stage name," she said, like I was signing up for an open mic night instead of stripping. Cue panic mode. I didn't have anything remotely sexy, so I threw on the closest thing I could find, a black bodysuit and some cheap heels that weren't made for dancing. The stage name? I went with Raven because it sounded cool and mysterious in the moment. I regretted it instantly. When I got to the club, it hit me just how real this was. The Velvet Lounge was dimly lit, with neon lights bouncing off every surface and a steady thump of bass-heavy music vibrating through the walls. It smelled like body spray, sweat, and vodka, basically sensory overload. I stood there in the entrance, clutching my purse like a lifeline, wondering if I could still back out. Tasha found me at the bar, gave me a quick once-over, and handed me a clipboard with a contract and house rules. "First night, huh?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "Yeah," I muttered, feeling like a deer in headlights. "Relax. No one's expecting you to be a pro," she said. "Just smile, keep your cool, and don't let the creeps get to you." Noted. Keep cool. Avoid creeps. No problem, except I was definitely not cool. The dressing room was packed with dancers getting ready. Some were applying makeup with military precision. Others were scrolling through their phones, completely unbothered by the chaos. One girl, who introduced herself as Star, noticed me struggling to put on my heels and grinned. "First time? Is it that obvious?" I asked, trying to keep my hands from shaking. "Yup," she said with a wink. "Don't worry, babe. Everyone sucks at first." Before I could even process what was happening, the DJ's voice boomed over the speakers. "All right, let's give it up for Raven." Oh God, that was me. I took a deep breath, grabbed the pole for dear life, and stepped onto the stage. The lights hit me like a spotlight, and I could feel every eye in the room turn toward me. My heart was racing so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. The music started, some slow, sultry beat, and I tried to remember everything Lexi had told me. Move slow, flip your hair, and don't look terrified. Easy, right? Yeah. No. My first attempt at a spin was a complete fail. I misjudged my grip, slipped halfway through, and had to awkwardly catch myself before face-planting on the floor. The worst part? A guy in the front row laughed. I wanted to crawl into a hole and never come out, but I told myself to keep going. I smiled, even though I was dying inside, swayed my hips a little, and did my best to act like the stumble was totally on purpose. Somehow, a few singles landed on the stage. Not a lot, but enough to keep me going. I finished the song without falling, which felt like a miracle, and bolted off the stage the second the music ended. In the dressing room, Star was waiting for me, still grinning. "See? Not so bad," she said. "You didn't even cry. That's a win." The rest of the night was awkward, to say the least. I managed to offer a couple of lap dances, though they felt more like weird middle school slow dances than anything remotely sexy. The first guy I danced for was this nervous college kid who couldn't stop apologizing. "Sorry, I've never done this before," he mumbled, like he was the one embarrassing himself. The second guy? Not so sweet. He reeked of whiskey and kept trying to grab me, even after I told him no twice. I ended the dance early and walked away without a word. When I told Tasha about it, expecting to get in trouble for cutting the dance short, she just shrugged. "Good call. Some guys are trash." By the end of the night, I was exhausted. My feet were killing me. My thighs ached from clinging to the pole, and I was covered in glitter that I knew would haunt me for the next week. But when I counted my tips, $200, I felt a strange little spark of pride. It wasn't a fortune, but it was more than I'd ever made in a night before. Walking out of the club with cash stuffed into my bra and my heels dangling from my fingers, I felt different. Not confident, exactly, but like I'd proven something to myself. I'd done something terrifying and made it through. I wasn't perfect, but I'd survived, and that felt good. I went back the next night, and the night after that. It got easier. I learned how to move without tripping, how to flirt without feeling fake, and how to spot the creeps before they even open their mouths. I wasn't the best dancer, but I figured out how to work the floor and make it through each shift with a little more confidence. After a few months, I decided it was time to move on. But those nights at the club, they taught me more than I ever expected. I learned how to set boundaries, how to stand my ground, and how to fake confidence until it felt real. So yeah, my first night was a hot mess. But it was also the start of something that made me stronger than I ever thought I could be. And for that, I wouldn't change a thing.